This is SOAL Night Live number 29, Memories of Kevin Gilbert, with my guests tonight, Stan Cotey, Marc Bonilla, and Dave Kerzner. Howdy, Stan. Howdy,
Hey,
Dave.
Sean.
Hey, Marc. Good to see everybody.
Awesome.
Hope you enjoyed my little preamble.
I was absolutely enthralled, man.
Okay, good. You know, I usually charge for those, but I figured I'd
I know you do. I felt like I'm definitely up on the deal already.
All right, good, excellent. Well, it's good to see you guys. Thanks for dropping in tonight.
Hey, Dave. Hey, Stan.
Hey, Marc.
Hey, Marc. You guys doing?
I take it you all know each other.
And Stan, I haven't seen since the dawn of man, I think, wasn't it?
It's insane, and we live kind of in the same area, so it's
exactly. Well, that's why we haven't seen each other.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah. No good excuse.
It's too easy. Right.
It's too easy. It's no challenge. Yeah.
Have lunch next week. Make it happen.
Awesome.
Well, thank you all for spending the evening with us here and taking a look back at one of our favorite artists. So I want to kind of catch up and see what each of you have been up to lately and how this whole break and unusual time we're going through is affecting you. Most of my musician friends have been pretty unaffected in some ways. You know, if they're doing studio work, it seems like they got all the more time to concentrate. If they're playing live, then they're kind of screwed. But the majority I've been talking to are more studio rats than anything else. So I don't know, let's go around the room and see what y'all have been up to. How about you, Stan? What have you been up to lately? And tell us kind of what you do as of late.
Right. You're talking about the bank robbery thing, or are you talking about the musical part of it? Okay.
That's right.
Yeah. So I live in LA. I moved around a little bit, but I moved back to LA about 4 years ago. And so that has been incredibly fun, just kind of being back in town again. I do session work for people. I do a little bit of film and TV stuff. I have a composer friend who these other guys know, also called Ed Goldfarb, who writes for the Pokemon franchise. So I get to do some of the episodic and feature stuff. And great. I've got a record coming along with a LA friend of mine, a guy called Dennis Churchill Dries, who's a super, super talented singer, songwriter, bass player. Was in a band called Taxi Rodeo and a band called White Sister, kind of at the end of the 80s, early 90s. So we're about 9 songs into some kind of release that's coming up. And I've got kind of a solo project that's been paused for the moment that Dave's asked me about a few times over the years. I just played on Nick DiVirgilio's most recent record, Invisible, which I think is an awesome record. I get to play on a track with Tony Levin, which was really
good
fun.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so just stuff like that. Lots of good just things.
Okay, excellent. All righty. Well, how about you, Dave?
I'm always busy. Just so yeah, for me it is no different apart from not being able to play live, but writing songs and recording for both my band In Continuum, my solo stuff. I have a new solo album I'm working on. I have a project with Fernando Perdomo called Squids Out to Sea, where I write lyrics to his songs. I've got some tribute stuff. We're working on a Genesis tribute together for fun. Lots of cool people. And we may do possibly some international remote Sound of Contact experiments with the guys from Sound of Contact. I don't know if it'll end up being a Sound of Contact album, but Simon Collins, Phil's son, he just released an album yesterday, and he's been itching to do it. And, the other guys, Matt and Kelly, myself, we're all just kind of, we're all up for it. It's just a matter of, now there's really, we used to actually want to we have to get together in the same room. And now with the pandemic, it's like, well, you really kind of are forced to figure out how to work remotely, which I like to do anyway. And I do with a lot of people. So, now it's the challenge to see if, what you can get done working with people remotely. So, yeah, that's what I'm up to.
Sure, you got the time, so you might as well be on it.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. How about you, Marc? What's been happening?
I've been raising chickens, Sean.
Really? So you haven't had to buy eggs?
I'm not kidding. We have 9 chickens now. We have 3 buff Orpingtons, 5 Rhode Island Reds, and a barred rock. Yeah. So, they understand me. you know.
Scrambled
and
eggs every morning then, right?
well, they will be in 4 months. You know, right now we just put them up in a pen in the backyard, but they're actually very cool. You kind of get out there, you know, with all the other stuff that's going around peripherally. You can get out there and hang with your chickens. It's actually pretty grounding, you know.
Are you able to throw away your alarm clock now that you got them, or is that?
No, we don't. No roosters yet.
Okay, good.
We're
All right.
trying to keep that at a minimum. But
Yeah,
and I've got a pet squirrel that we saved that fell out of a tree. It's like an ark around here, you know. So, but we've got a big backyard, so you know all the animals get to run free back here. I think there's a newsletter that goes out that says if you're injured or dysfunctional, go to the Bonillas because we tend to find a lot of animals. Other than that, yeah, I'm still involved in doing music. You know, different things. You know, luckily, you know, because they have a studio, you know, a lot of the guys that I work with, you know, they're constantly out touring, and so they never did have to have studio at their house. They were always out at the studio. So now that's become problematic at the moment, and they're all having to, you know, start learning the software and all of that stuff. So I feel like everybody that's here has got to step ahead of that, you know, just because we've got our in-house studios.
Sure.
So it's been working out a lot of different things. I just got to finish doing a project with Harry Shearer, you know, because I do the Derek Small stuff as well, and
Right. Yeah.
you know, I get to play mandolin
with the
with
orchestra,
Stonehenge, so it's like a wet dream for me, you know. And that's how they do it. You know? So we just finished up working with TJ Benston on that. And, working a lot with Thomas Lang. We did some remote stuff at the Coach House recently. I do a lot of voiceover work as well on the other side. And then I've got a project coming in that we're doing with Nashville. We have 2 different factions, one here and one there. And I've got a team of the guys here that are going to be in the LA band. That we're going to be doing rock versions of country songs, and in Nashville they're going to be doing country versions of rock songs. And so it'll be a fun project. I've got Waddy Wattell in there, and Lee Sklar, and Taylor Hawkins is going to be part of it. Troy Lucetta, Greg Bissonette, Lukather, you know, all the guys, and it's going to be fun, you know. And so it's just a question of in this whole time staying visible, you know, and keeping moving forward and taking advantage of doing all the stuff that you always said you didn't have enough time to do when this wasn't here. Now you have time to do it, so you have no excuse. You have to just, you know, push forward. So, you know, things like that.
All right.
Marc, you just did a record not that long ago.
Yeah, Cellular Debris. Yeah, it was. And it was 25 years between that and the last one because of all the other stuff in between, you know. I just didn't want to, you know, I had done 2 records and I didn't want to do a third one. I got involved, at that time actually I was involved, you know, Kevin helped me do the first one, and then you know, we parted company to engage in our own stuff, and I didn't want to do a third one for a while. I got involved in a lot of movies and soundtrack stuff, and that was very lucrative and just a great kind of opportunity to work with all these composers and then composing, you know. And so it took 25 years before I actually got around to doing the next one. But I took everything that I tried to learn, that I did learn in that 25 years, and tried to apply it to this new record. I'm very, very happy with it, you know. And you know, it's so far I've only gotten 1 shitty review, you know.
Oh, that's great.
So,
Was the writing done over?
The guy just hated it. He completely said it's overproduced. It's like, this is nothing like the other 2 albums. I'm so disappointed. I'm going to never play it again. You know, so I was like, excellent, good. I'm glad it, you know, if he was just indifferent towards it, like, yeah, you know, it's like, it's take it or leave it, then I would have failed. But the fact that he disliked it that much, I thought it was great. So
well, I didn't make it for you.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
So, but other than that, everybody else has liked it. So
Yeah. Was the writing for that over the 25-year period, or was the writing for it all recent?
Well, some of it actually was a couple of the tunes I had started like for a third album, and just kind of let them on. Just put them on the back burner. They were. Yeah, I had to pull them actually from the ADATs. That's how old they were. Wow. You know, some of the tracks from that, and then you know, went from there. But most of the stuff was new, you know. But there were a couple of things that I thought, you know, these are still good. These are still good themes that I can you know, expound upon. So, you know, we did. So it was. But yeah, it was great. And then Ryan Green actually had the courage to mix it, and that was not an easy task, because we actually at some point maxed out his his mixing board at 160 tracks. You know, because there's a lot of guitars on it, but in an orchestral fashion. So
Cool.
Great record.
So, I wanted to go back and talk a bit about, some of y'all's early beginnings musically, and kind of talk a bit about, what inspired you to play, when you started playing, some of the albums that really inspired you early on, maybe even the first record you bought with your own money, first concert you went to that blew your mind, that kind of stuff. We usually talk about this for a little while. How about you, Stan?
Okay, so both of my parents were musical. My mom was a gigging musician, played around kind of the Bay Area, and while she was in an older age group, she was as hippie can be. It was her whole entire culture. And so my dad is also really musical, but my dad's musical in an odd way in that he can play. I had a recent conversation with him because he plays guitar pretty well. He can play piano pretty well. And he was talking about cornet. And I said, "Oh, do you play cornet?" And he goes, "Yeah. And I also play clarinet and trumpet and trombone." And then I'm like, "Trombone?" And he goes, "Yeah." And hang on a second. He goes running back. This is current. This is like right now. He goes running back to his room and comes out with a trombone and plays. And it's like his tone is good. His intonation's good. And so I'm just sort of shocked. He did some music schooling, and so his theory chops are good. And he kind of has enough of a love of it that he's just pursued it across his life, just kind of for fun. So that was sort of my early thing. There was music in my house all the time. The music that my mom listened to was a lot of like early sort of acoustic blues, Lightning Hopkins, a little bit of Minnie Riperton, that kind of stuff. Not so much like the Chicago stuff, but kind of older even. So I grew up with a lot of blues. My first introduction to pop music, other than like the AM radio, was she brought home After Bathing at Baxter's from Jefferson Airplane, which is a pretty odd record regardless of context. I love that record, but it's pretty odd no matter what lens you look at it through. So that was sort of my first taste of things that weren't like bluegrass or folk music or acoustic blues music. The first record I ever bought was a Hey Jude single that I think also had like Old Brown Shoe and Ballad of John and Yoko and maybe something else on it. And so the Beatles.
An EP then, right? It's an EP then?
Yeah, it's an EP.
Oh, that was cool. That's cool.
And so that was my first record with my own money. And the Beatles were like, they are ground zero for everything for me. If you whittle it down to one tiny little speck of a point at the beginning of the universe, it's the Beatles. And then progressive music happened for me pretty early on. I had a friend, Tim McDonald, who was really into ELP. So I got ELP and King Crimson from him. I found Gentle Giant on my own. Somebody got me into Genesis, and I got really, really deep into Genesis. Kind of through the 70s, that turned into UK. And then through UK, I went Holdsworth, and then I started going backwards on Holdsworth. So for me, like I've loved progressive music since the 70s, but I've also loved a lot of other music. I love 20th century classical music a lot. I have a pretty good collection of stuff. And so I listen to that stuff quite a bit. I listen to a lot of film music because I think film music is kind of a way station of the 20th century. So yeah, and all that stuff is still present. I listen to modern music. I have an 18-year-old daughter and a 21-year-old son and a 23-year-old son. And so I listen to modern music, all the music that they listen to, and have kind of kept current along the way, but I've still held on to the old stuff. So it's like I just keep kind of growing my universe a little bit. So, yeah.
Okay. And what's some of the first shows you went to as a teenager that really impressed you? And
my first concert I saw was at the San Diego Sports Arena, and Ted Nugent opened, and Blue Oyster Cult came out second, and Aerosmith headlined.
Wow.
And it was Get Your Wings maybe or something. It was after that. It was probably after Toys in the Attic. Blue Oyster Cult was flipping amazing. Nugent was good, and Aerosmith, the mix was terrible. So it was all sort of drums and vocals and not a lot of guitars, and it was hard to hear what was going on. Were they wasted? But I don't know exactly. But yeah, those guys know. But Blue Oyster Cult left a mark that still remains, and that's still one of those bands that I don't tell a lot of people, but I still like them.
They have a new album, first one in like 12 years or something.
Yeah. Did you ever see them as Soft White Underbelly?
No. No, I knew about them, but I think Agents of Fortune was about the first time I kind of got aware of them.
Yeah.
Okay. So what year was that? Like 78-ish, you think?
6, 7, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. All righty. Well, how about you, Mark?
First concert I went to, it was like having triplets before I ever had any kids. It was Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention in '90, the Fillmore East, with Flo and Eddie.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was the first one I saw.
Yeah.
So rather indelible on my brain, And that was an amazing show. Just the fact that no one stopped playing the whole time. There was no break in between this. From the time they got out there to the time someone was playing. Whether it was Ainsley back there or whether it was, whoever it was just, I just marveled at the fact that they took no breaks, that it was one constant piece of music all the way through. It just flowed all the way through, and not easy like blues music. This stuff was so complicated, some of it, and just funny, and it was amazing. It was just an amazing event for a first concert, It was incredible.
Oh yeah, man! A life-changing thing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
However, I think the best life-changing story I got was from Joe Puerta from Ambrosia. These guys were, they all grew up in L.A., right? They're going up to Sunset Strip, 1969, and they all dropped acid. And they go by the Roxy, or is it Rock? No, it was a whiskey. It went by the whiskey. Goes, what's this King Crimson? Who are these guys, right? They go in, and the first song they hear as they're peaking is 21st Century Schizoid Man. So if you can imagine dropping acid, peaking right when you heard that song for the first time, it's that it changed their life.
Yeah.
So I think that will beat any first-time band story.
I mean, that would be a mind fuck sober.
It is sober, yeah.
It does actually explain a lot, Mark.
Come on.
There's some eclectic taste there, so that definitely you can see the seeds of it now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
first album was actually that I bought with my own money was a 45 by the Trashmen, Surfing Bird. And it was, I remember, because back then you would just sit there and you would stare at the label going around.
Sure.
And because the label, especially like for Capitol, it had that spiral. It kind of hypnotized you. The orange and yellow thing, man, it would just like hypnotize, as you went around. There were certain designs that I think were made for drug inducement, but that was on the Garrett label. I think it was probably the only record that was ever on the Garrett label. It was 2 minutes and 20 seconds, and it was just bird, but a bird is a wire, bird. I played it nonstop all afternoon until my mom came in and said, honey, can you play the flip side of that, please? So we played King of the Surf and then right back to Surfing Bird for the rest of the day, But, I mowed a lot of the lawns to get my 45s and my albums, That's how I got a hold of those. So.
I inherited a stack of records from my older brother, who was 16 years my senior. So when I was about 2, he moved out like any sensible 18-year-old would. And left behind, took what he liked the best and left the rest.
But the great thing about 45s was the fact that you had so much area for bass on there, because you had a big fat track like that at 45 RPMs, right? And I remember when I'd get the album, like when I got Light My Fire, it was like, wait a minute, sounds wimpy compared to the 45, because the 45, the thing sounded massive because, you had the room for the needle lathe to cut back and forth to accommodate that bass. Where on the singles or on the LPs, it only had like a half that length. So the 45s are always the way to go. They always had the beefy sound, more than anything else.
It's almost worth having both, having the album
Absolutely.
and pick those up too.
Sure. Yeah. I still have all mine.
So it's like, and I can still remember those labels on every one of those.
Of course you can. And the spines. When you look at your right and you look at your vinyl collection, you can see synchronicity like a mile away. With those three colors on there, you can see all that. You know every single spine because you would just pick them out.
Absolutely. Or like the Peter Gabriel ones, he always has a rainbowy thing going on there.
Yeah,
so
sure.
So how about you, Dave? What were your big firsts?
First album I bought was Don't Look Back by Boston.
Okay.
And, back then too, like I either bought albums because there was a kid who lived down the street who had a great album collection and he would tell me what to get, or buy the cover the cover was so cool with all those crystal thingies and everything, and like a Guitar City. So I had that. I had Duke by Genesis, Kansas albums, and Styx, and Journey, and all sorts of stuff. But I started to like go from Prog influenced pop more toward prog, getting into eventually Yes and King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and stuff. But starting off, even like with Genesis, actually, I went down the rabbit hole, starting off with, I think Turn It On Again was the first song I heard. And the first video I saw too, where I wanted to be a keyboard player, because I saw, Tony playing all the keyboards around him. And I was like, wow, that's that, and I played piano for years, but not really realizing that, there were synthesizers and all these other things you could do. Like you could have a whole stack of them around you. And it looked like you could just do any sound. I thought, well, that's the instrument to play, because you can do any sound, So, that's how I got my start.
Okay. And
what was your favorite? What was everybody's favorite album cover? Like the one that you didn't even know the stuff on it. You just said that album. I need to own that album cover. Hope the music's is good.
For me, it was Tommy.
Yeah.
I thought that was a real eye catcher. It was kind of had some mystique to it.
Yeah.
And I love that album. That was like 4 years old, and it was my favorite record. It was one that my brother left behind.
Yeah.
And
what about you, Stan? What was your?
Well, the aforementioned After Bathing at Baxter's has the amazing Rube Goldberg contraption on it.
Great. Yeah, that flying, the biplane.
Yeah. And you can spend a long time kind of untwisting that thing.
Yeah, my brother still has a poster of that when I was growing up. So yeah. What about you, Dave?
Any of those Roger Dean Yes covers.
What's your favorite, Roger? What's your favorite Yes cover?
Well, my favorite cover is not my favorite Yes album, but I think my favorite cover is Tales of Topographic Oceans.
Yep. That's the one.
Now, I used to have a major
better.
I used to have a major argument with Kevin about that, because my favorite album is Tales. I love that record.
100%.
And Kevin would get so pissed off because, dude, you're totally discounting Close to the Edge and Siberian Khatru and You and I. How can you possibly say that Tales is your best album? There's no fucking way. And I said, dude, I don't know what it is. I give full street cred to Close to the Edge, but for some reason, when I put on that double album, it takes me more landscapes and more places than Close to the Edge. I'm more marveled by the compositional heft of Close to the Edge, but Tales is more of an exploration. I tend to lose myself more in it. And it's a great cover, like you said, Dave.
Oh, yeah.
So it's my favorite Yes cover. I agree.
What's your favorite side of Tales?
Boy, it changes. It used to be the Ancient, because of that great Steve Howe classical.
Next to Mood for a Day, that's his best nylon piece.
Yeah, I agree.
Ritual's good.
And then it was Revealing Science, and I still, it was embedded. I still know the whole prologue to that, Dawn of Light, Lie Between the Silence, Head, Soul Sources, Jason Infusions of Wonder. Yeah,
that's right.
But now I think it's Ritual now, and it was Remembering for a while too. But Ritual, it's got a great bass solo.
I've gone through that too. Hard pressed, I'd say my favorite Yes epic is side one, and it's one that they don't play very often. I've seen 10 Close to the Edges, but I've only seen them do Revealing Science twice.
Yeah, saw them at the Tales. When we saw Tales, they did 3 of the sides. They didn't do the Ancient, which I was bummed, but they did Remembering, Tales, and Ritual.
Well, that first half of the Ancient is like the wackest stuff they ever did. But I love it, especially with the marimba kind of going on. It's so
wonderful.
Cool, man. They just never did anything.
House barely in control of his slide at that point. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and that just points right to Relayer. It's like, if you think this is weird, stick around.
Absolutely.
So great.
Although I think I agree with Kevin. Sorry,
of course you do. As will most Yes fans, of course. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's an amazing record. Gives me the end of Close to the Edge still gives me goosebumps to this day. I get goosebumps every time it gets to. I get up. I get that whole thing. I just break out in goosebumps every time. It's not the air
just like the production and Bruford and everything is just phenomenal. So.
I agree. I'm totally with you.
Whereas like Topographics a little looser.
Yeah,
it could have been reeled in a little, but at the same time, I get what you're saying. I love all those albums, Relayer And then Going for the One really that's another well-produced album.
Yeah,
And they're
Sounds
all
great.
a bit different, aren't they? I mean, they all have their own attributes and their own character, as if it was one actor playing a lot of different parts in different films, and they were all good because it was the same actor. You know?
Well, and like the Beatles, they took you on a journey. They didn't just keep doing the same thing. Or Zappa, same deal. Just keeps going to a different place.
That's right.
Yeah.
Kept
Well,
doing their interests.
But the Going for the One album cover is that Hypnosis as well?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
get a lot
it
of
started
flack.
to get into the man-ass thing, which Rush was doing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It bummed us out because we wanted another Roger Dean, and it was like we didn't get it, you know. And it's like, you know.
I sometimes wonder if those two albums would be regarded more highly if they had Roger Dean covers.
Well, the Yes album is a terrible album cover. Sorry.
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
lame.
Very.
It's an awesome record.
Yeah,
Amazing.
my God.
It's a beautiful, awesome record, and to me, it fits perfectly with a Roger Dean artwork, like Fragile. I love Fragile too.
Yeah.
Of course. Fragile's the best sounding album from an engineering standpoint, I'd say, followed by probably Drama.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Fragile's down there for me. It's maybe at number 6 or even 7 on my list of favorite Yes records. It's pretty far down there.
Yeah, but stuff like Heart of
It's
the
up there for me.
Sunrise, I mean, come on.
It's got Heart of the Sunrise, man, and you know.
Yeah,
Side of the Sky.
yeah. Southside of the Sky's good.
Yeah, you know the
South
one
Side
big,
Sky,
you know the one
my
big
favorite.
Django run in that one. You know the one. Yeah.
I love the
Right.
piano solo in that. It's incredible.
Yeah.
I have to say that I
So-
preferred Rick back when he had a limited palette. Like once he got everything at the
Sound-wise, you're
candy
saying?
store, it got a little annoying at times.
Yeah.
But back when it was just a piano, a mellotron, an organ, you
Mini
know,
mode.
it was beautiful.
It
But
was.
he's one of the only people who used the polymoog as a lead instrument.
Yeah.
Well, you know, in Tormato time, and it was kind of like, dude. I mean, because you know, the mini moog, you just can't go wrong with those instruments. The mini moog, the Hammond, the mellotron, piano, pipe
Clavinet.
organ.
Yeah, there's
Gary Newman used a polymoog as a lead instrument.
Well, in a more Atmos way, you know, not playing fast, but he did it amazingly. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that was that Tuned Cars was like 79, I think.
Right.
But it
And then of course the if you
83.
could holster it, the Yamaha CS80 was just an amazing. You know, when you listen to the first UK, you listen to Nevermore, you listen to all of the stuff that Eddie was
Alaska.
doing on there. It's just crazy, man. It was so. And then Keith, you know, doing it on Pirates and all of that. It
Yeah,
was,
the GX1.
Yeah, the GX1. Yeah. Just amazing.
And there was only like a handful of those made. Like John Paul Jones had it, Stevie Wonder.
They were very, very temperamental. You couldn't take them on tour. They always broke down. They were always, Eddie was always telling me they were just a pain. He had a love-hate relationship with those exactly because of that, you know. But they just sounded glorious. You know?
You know,
Isn't that funny? It's like a lot of the prog keyboard players, like Tony Hackett or Tony Banks or Wakeman or Eddie Jobson, those guys, like they hate the instruments that they played on. It's like, you know, ask Wakeman about a mellotron or ask Tony Banks about a mellotron or whatever. And I listen to that stuff and I'm like, wow, that's when you sounded your best. That's when you sounded most like you. And those guys are like, never want to see one again.
Yeah.
Dude, you have no idea. I'm doing sounds for Genesis, and I tried to do it for the previous tour where they were going to Tony was going to take a rack PC, and because he uses my sounds and software with IK Multimedia, and I do a Mellotron plugin called Sampletron and all sorts of stuff, Sonic Synth, and now we have Syntronic with Eric Norlander, and the B3X, which is the Hammond B3 plugin. And he is doing it this time, assuming that everything gets back on track with the reunions. But I've had actual like arguments, almost kind of like the same kind of arguments you'd have with Kevin, where we're talking about, you know, Tony and I were talking about the Mellotron, and you're absolutely right, Stan. He's like, oh yeah, no, I hate the like he hates the choir, the Mellotron choir. We all love the choir; it's amazing. And I was trying to like sort of lightly argue with him and say, well, why? It sounded amazing. He's like, yeah, because it
sounds like
kind of like an organ, and you have to run it through all these delays to get it to sound good. And I'm like, yeah, and it sounded good. He likes the Mellotron violins, he likes the strings, he likes the flute and the Chamberlain flute, but like he likes some of the sounds, he doesn't like others. But like his stance on it is the obvious, which is, you know, those guys had to cart those around and they broke a lot and they have bad association with it. But the other thing is that from their standpoint, they always wanted Korgs and the Yamahas, and they always wanted what that does now. And from us, the next generation, we listen to those records, and that's the standard, and that's the sound. And the new keyboards are not as exciting. So it's the flip. It's like, to them, the new keyboards are exciting, and to us, the old keyboards are exciting, including this Mellotron stand.
Yes. Yeah, Dave and I share a Mellotron.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I think one of the drawbacks was always the 8 seconds, and then it was Progus Interruptus. You had to re-trigger, and that sucked because oh shit! I almost got to the end of that measure. Now I have to splice it in.
Does that
get used to lifting a note at a time and letting the note kind of rewind and then continuing?
Yeah, it was a style to having to play that thing. I think that made it.
There's like a modern version. What do they call it? The Microtron, I think.
Well, I have the rack mounted one, and it's still 8 seconds. Like, look, you could have looped this.
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah, it doesn't have to be that authentic where you're building in the idiosyncrasies of the damn thing. Loop it.
Limitations even now. You can have it last forever. Yeah. That's kind of weird. You should have an option,
Thank you. Yeah.
I do on mine, but yeah.
Good for you, man.
Just let it last all day.
So speaking of favorite Yes records, my fun dark admission is that as many times as I've been able to play The Lamb live, which is twice, The Lamb is not my favorite Genesis record. Selling England is my favorite Genesis record.
All right.
So it's like.
And why is that? Why is that? Tell us.
I think the songs are better.
Okay.
I think the songs are kind of closer to their Beatley roots in a way. I think they were getting really experimental with The Lamb, and some parts of The Lamb are breathtaking. Parts of The Lamb are just unbelievable. But to me, it's a little inconsistent throughout, whereas Selling England just starts and it's just insane all the way through.
Yeah.
So
I pretty much agree. I mean, Firth of Fifth is hard to beat. It's like one of the quintessential prog tracks. Yeah. Steve's probably most famous and lyrical solo.
Yeah.
That's saying a
lot.
But
More Fool Me is kind of filler, and After the Ordeal is sort of whatever. But the rest of it is absolutely, you're right, epic. And the sound, I love the sound of the drums on that record.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But kind of Bruford-y, actually, a little bit.
Yeah.
And jazz, yeah. But I love The Lamb. Maybe I love The Lamb the most out of all. Well, no, Kevin loved The Lamb too.
Right.
A lot. Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk a bit about you guys dissecting it and learning it and all that here in a few minutes. Definitely. I think I'd go for Selling England too. The Lamb's kind of its own thing, It's kind of separate from the rest of it. It's almost like it goes from Selling England to Trick of the Tail seamlessly. And in the middle is this Lamb thing that almost seems like something Peter could have done a solo a few years later in some ways.
Yeah,
he could have done it on his own.
You hear the parts of Selling England where it's like it gets instrumental for a minute. It's like Peter could go out and get his taxes done or something, and then before he has to come back and sing again.
Right.
So you can sort of see the way the band was going a little bit, and we made a joke about that when we did it in '94, and because a lot of it got to be where like it was the focus of the band more so than like Peter and the songs. So that split sort of made sense, but they were growing more and more in that way.
A slightly abridged version. Or did
a slightly chopped lamb was what Kevin called it.
Okay,
lamb chops.
Yeah,
and then the stuff after Peter left, those first two albums with with
Trick of the Tail and Wind and Water,
I think are some of their best albums. Best sounding, and I think Tony just grew a little bit more as a composer. Stuff like One for the Vine. I mean, that's some of his best stuff. I think.
I like the later stuff too. I like the eponymous record. I like Abacab. I think there's some good stuff on those records.
Yeah. I do
That's
too.
underrated. I love Abacab.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so quirky.
Duke.
And,
oh my God, Duke.
Oh, Duke, you know. But Duke and Abacab, I mean, from a keyboard standpoint, those keyboards are just lush, poly-analog early, ARP Quadra and Prophet 510, and it's just a CP70 through that chorus. That's a very distinct Tony sound. And the funny thing is, just, not to brag that like Tony's my buddy or anything, because he's not. I just only had some conversations with him and about sounds and stuff. But one of the funny things is he stumbled upon these things. A lot of the sounds he used were presets, like even the Pro Soloist back on Selling England and The Lamb. Those were just presets, silly little presets, but they sound amazing. I mean, they're called Cosmic Wow and Buzz Lead or whatever, fuzz, but they sound amazing, and people think he's some sort of like genius programmer, Keith with his modular where he has to actually patch it together and things like that. It's like, no, it's just button. But you know, later on when he uses it on the Rolands or the Korgs and stuff, that's when he sounds like everybody else. It doesn't. It's not really getting in there and doing that kind of programming. But those the sounds and and Phil Collins, his drums on those records, Hugh Padgham when he got involved, like Drama and Abacab have a similar kind of Hugh Padgham drumness to it. Big
Kevin
drums.
liked Drama a lot.
Did he? Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think I have Kevin's copy of Drama somewhere. I borrowed it.
Wow.
To him.
That's wild. So, Mark, what's your favorite ELP album?
Trilogy, yeah.
Okay.
It was the first one I heard, you know, and, you know, I heard, of course, and then I heard Endless Enigma, you know, and that whole opening with the heartbeat, you know, and the, you know, that little whistle thing, it was so, and then those big, huge Steinway riffs that were going down in the low end and then a little bit of bongo and stuff. It was amazing. I mean, just, it was soundtrack music is what it was, you know. I was over at my buddy Jim's house when a buddy of his brought it in. I was just transfixed on it, you know, and that sound of the percussion on the Hammond as it goes up, you know, on the opening, you know, it just, the sonics were great. Offord's engineering, you know, I think it was their best composed album. I mean, as great as Tarkus is, and it's wonderful, I think that album, it calmed down a little bit, and I think it was more honest with what Keith's, I think, you know, ultimate direction would be. I think it foretold a lot, especially when we did the Three Fates project and we orchestrated that with the Munich Symphony, and you hear Endless Enigma done as a symphonic piece. It's absolutely beautiful what he wrote. You know, it's just phenomenal, and it really then it dawns on you what an amazing composer he was. You know, because you're taking it out of the context of just rock and putting it more in the timeless context of orchestra. And you realize all the sonorities and the voice leading and all the things that were going on. I think all the way through that, when you listen to Trilogy, you listen to the opening strains of how beautiful that is. It's gorgeous, you know, just. So for me, and plus when you open up that gatefold, man, I coveted those boots he had on. If you remember those boots, they're out in the forest, right? I asked him, so where are those? I want those boots, man. Where did he says, I'd give them to you if I knew where they were, you know. But he had the best rock uniform on, man. He had that orange, you know, vest like the James West, Wild West cut vest, and then the blue tights and those badass shoes, you know. So he looked great too. So, you know.
Where's brain salad surgery in your world?
Where's Brain Salad?
Yeah.
Probably third. I mean, you know, I would go Trilogy, Tarkus, Brain Salad.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
Not
Beach,
for any particular
Beach is in
reason.
there.
I just think it was, well, you know, when you first listen to somebody, it's like your first girlfriend. You know, there's a certain thing with her, you know, where there's a romanticism attached to that. You know, and regardless of whether you consider the musical merits different, there's an emotional attachment to your first time listening to something. You know, for me, Gentle Giant, it was Octopus, Boys in the Band, because that was the first tune I ever heard them do. Yeah, and it was like, I know Kennedy was shot. I remember when John Lennon was shot, and I remember where the hell I was when I heard Boys in the Band. You know, it was that type of thing where and to this day, that'll always be my favorite song because of the impact that I witnessed sonically, you know. So I think with that, you know, after hearing Tarkus, and because I back engineered from Trilogy to Tarkus to, you know, the Dove album, and then bounded forward to Carnival 9, you know, and all the stuff on there. So,
what were your favorite pieces to play with Keith?
Well, it was obviously Tarkus, because I never knew what the hell he was going to do. The whole middle section was improv, you know, when he would come out there with the ribbon and all of that stuff. We didn't know anything about what was going to happen. There was a lot of improv going on during the show, so it kept things renewed. I remember there was one point right before, was it Touch and Go? He did like this. We were in Vienna, off in some forest somewhere in the back, you know, somewhere in this concert back there, and he started doing this piece. You know, it was just like be an intro to something. And it was amazing. It was like some lost relic from ELP days. And he's pounding away, and I went over to him and I said, "What's that?" And he goes, "I don't know." And I said, well, don't stop. He says, I don't intend to, and he's just making it up as he goes. And I was just praying that Keith Wexler was running the DAT tape out in the front, which he was, thank God. And I took that piece, and it was all, in different time, because he was just, no one was following him. He was just doing this. So I scored it out, gave it to Bob Birch and Greg Bissonette, and we did it. It turned out to be Blue Inferno on the Keith Emerson Band album, because
awesome.
It was just this amazing thing that he just channeled off the top of his head. So it varied from night to night what was my favorite song, because it so much of it was the improv in the middle of all of that stuff, and so it was just that was one of the joys was the unpredictability, because it renewed the band every night, and the crowd got a feeling like what we were seeing tonight was different than what the crowd saw last night, because it was different, so
that's cool.
I thought it was really compelling. I have a DVD of when you guys played it at Moogfest. Remember doing that one?
I do.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
really cool re-imaging of it. I love your guitar accents and such that you worked in there. Really
well,
cool
the
stuff.
thing about Keith too was the fact that he was finally able to work in a quartet, and where he didn't feel like he had to shoulder the whole heft of all of the melody and all of the stuff. He could relax and comp a little bit, and I could play some of the lines and all of that stuff. He really liked supporting, so it was great. I think he relaxed a lot for that reason.
Okay. And any memories playing with Eddie Jobson? I don't know if you remember this, but I actually met you. I was on the crew at Nearfest, and one of my jobs was to carry around a blonde 335 Epiphone and have everybody sign it. I remember I brought it to you, and you're like, I'm left-handed, so it's like
Right.
turn
Sign
it
the
around.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
No, Eddie was, again, we're playing UK music, for God's sakes, and it was like, it doesn't get any better than that for me, because I was that first album especially, and I when he asked me to join the band, I said, I'm not joining unless we do Nevermore. If we don't do Nevermore, it's a deal breaker. We're going to do that song, because it's my favorite UK song. I think it's an amazing piece of music, and yeah, of course. Yeah.
You nailed that solo too.
And then Wetton's harmonies, the vocal harmonies, and I got a Helicon, and I went through the entire thing and harmonized every one of those lines, and we're stepping through the stuff.
Wow.
So to go down to so, it was like all these stepped harmonies.
That's insane.
If I was going to do it, I was going to do it right, and Eddie just looked around and went, crikey, I said, look, I told you it was a deal breaker, and I don't come, without a full hand here. I'm going to do the work, so it was so fun to play that song, of course, and then only thing she needs was just such a great barn burner at the end, and it just, it's UK. It was just so, the hardest part though was to try and sing that stuff and play bass at the same time when it was a completely different thing, and running lyrics to In the Dead of Night, making sure that I didn't screw the lyrics up, because I don't use a pad, I just do it off the top of the head, and so it was a challenge, but it was fun. It was just,
So wait, you had to sing, play bass, and work the harmonizer as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And remember the lyrics.
Yeah. And then when we went out with the Fallen Angel tour, when it was just the two of us. Let's see, what the hell was I doing? I was playing acoustic guitar. I had a porch board doing the kick. I had bass on the other hand and was singing. I mean, I would have kicked ass on Santa Monica Pier with that shit,
Yeah.
But that was a challenge. I mean, even Eddie said, "How do you do that?" I said, "Well, I have to. We got two guys between us. All that stuff's essential. You have to do it. So that kept my brain constantly.
A lot of people don't realize that that's what's going on, especially if you're not like running tracks and you're just, you got to do. I remember when I played with Kevin with Thud, there's two different lineups of Thud, but the first one we did a song called Shadow Self.
Oh, it's a great song.
And it has a ton of backing vocals, those like vocals, the Vikings he called it.
Rapid fire too.
And I had the task of flying in the vocals.
Oh my God.
But
samples, yeah.
It was weird like you had to anticipate. So I literally had to split my brain.
Yep.
In that part where like, you will become me. We could have sang that, but he wanted the actual, and I had to play this funky Wurlitzer part at the same time.
Yep.
And think of the anticipation for the vocal triggering. So that slotted in at the right time.
Yep.
But as much as I feel that was complicated, there's nowhere near remembering the lyrics, singing the words, playing bass, and stepping through the harmonizer.
You could do it, Dave. You could do it if you put yourself in a position of danger like that. You do it. You light the tightrope behind you, because the only way you can go is forward, and that's all you do. You know.
Yeah.
You
train your brain.
Any of us could do it. But you have to just commit to it. You know, you commit to it.
One of the things that I think people don't realize is that, and it's what makes Sting so incredibly irritating, is bass rhythms and vocal rhythms tend to be contrary to each other. So to really sit on a pocket on a bass part and sing over the top of it is just impossible.
And the thing is, you have to make it sound like it's just very simple.
Yeah.
You know, so that when people start taking it together, go, wait a minute, damn, this isn't. That's the whole art is that you strive for, is to make it seem like it's just like no big deal. You know?
McCartney, Sting, all those guys are jerks.
Yeah.
You know, when it's funny because everyone also thinks of music maybe a little bit differently. And I remember certain things, Stan, like when we were learning the Lamb, and you were such a huge, you and Kevin, like for me to learn those keyboard parts, because we only learned it in like a week.
Yeah, we had like no time.
You know, you guys helped me. You're like, no, I think it's this, you know, whatever. And I remember, you know, you and Kevin are just incredible, you know, musicians. And I was sort of like, you know, trying to keep up with you guys. And, but there was this one thing that I could do that you two couldn't. And you were looking at me, especially Kevin was looking at me like, how are you doing that?
Get chicks after the gig?
Yeah.
That's a separate story for another time. But no, Slipperman. There's a part where there's two different time signature. You know, there's an arpeggio with 3 notes and an arpeggio with 4 notes, a line with 4 notes at the same time. And the reason I was able to do it is what you said, Mark, because to me, I heard it simply. I heard it just like, well, I just know what it's supposed to sound like.
You don't count it. You just feel it.
And Kevin was like trying to count it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, don't count it.
Don't stop that. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Just hear it.
Phrasing. That's how it is. I never count anything. I would screw myself up if I counted.
You just have to jump in.
You look at shapes. You look at like, you know, numerical shapes, and it's like, oh, it's this. Yes. You just repeat it. That's all you do. You don't go 1 and 2 and 3. You know, it was like when we did. It was great. We did 21st Century Schizoid Man at a concert with Ian Wallace. Right. He guested on drums. He showed me how to count the middle section of 21st, and it's in 4/4 time with 1 measure of 3/8 in there. And it was like, I can't do that. I see how it works mathematically, but I just know it from sitting in my bedroom and just copying it, you know. And I knew how long to wait before doing that stuff, you know. That was just me. I think it's applied ignorance is one of my attributes. You know,
same here.
I'm not, you know, I don't go in smart. I just go in going, I think it's this, because this is how a gut feels, you know, and that's kind of how it is, you know.
I think bravery, though, is also one of your attributes. I think that's the thing that gets you through that stuff.
Yeah, or stupidity. One or the other. You know.
A good combo.
No, I think it's a good foot on the gas pedal, man. Just go. You know?
Yeah, I mean, you know, come on. You know, if you fail, just fail better next time. It's okay, you know, and that's how you do it. But I mean, it's the high you get from it is a price that nobody really pays what it's worth when you get it right. And that's the whole reason to do any of that stuff is the potential payoff from getting it right. You know, it's okay if you screw it up. Everybody screws it up. You know, look at how many bootlegs where somebody blew a lick. You know, it's all right. The fact that you have the courage to go in and really give it your full attention and your full respect is all anybody can ever expect.
That's what makes it music, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. I got to play bass, had the privilege of playing bass with Adrian Ballou back in January with Nick on drums. And that was really fun, but I'm not a great bass player. And it was, you know, his trio format. He was using borrowed gear. So it was a little menacing, but it was really fun. But it was like hanging on by the seat of your pants the whole time.
Isn't that great, though?
It was fantastic.
You want to be out. You want to be out in the water far enough where your feet don't quite touch the sand.
That's right.
That's a good place to be.
And he's just such an awesome guy. He is so much fun.
Yes, he's a very sweet guy.
So, Mark, I wanted to talk a bit about California Transit Authority.
Oh, yeah.
Still working with them, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, not at the moment, but
Well, yeah.
everything just fell off the cliff like a herd of wild Mustangs in March. But yeah, other than that, yeah.
What's your favorite Chicago album?
Two.
Okay. I think mine's one, but it's almost.
Well, I didn't hear one first. Again, my stuff was out of sequence. You know, I didn't, or it would very well may have been one if I heard that first. But you know, Chicago 2 was, you know, when I heard, the suite, you know, for the girl and ballet for the girl from Buchanan. It's an amazing piece of work, you know, and so, it just, you know, and I think Chicago, they were sneaky little bastards. They snuck jazz and prog by you and called it pop.
Yeah.
You know? And then when you start, again, it's like any of these things, when you start learning it, like what Stan says and what Dave says, when you start learning this stuff, you go, wait a minute, this isn't like, there's some chords, there's some adult chords in here. There's some like serious stuff going on here. I gotta learn this stuff, you know, and you realize how deep the stuff is. But again, the artistry comes in making it seem like it's just, you know, simple pop music when it clearly wasn't. When you really start dissecting the frog and you look at all those amazing brass arrangements, you know, and all of that stuff, it's just was. And I think too, really from beginning to end, I think you talk about the consistency of particular albums, you know, I think that album to me is the most consistent, you know, because again, it's a double album we're talking about here, but right from Moving On to It Better End Soon, it's all the way through. It's just pressing and pushing boundaries, you know, just phenomenal stuff for me, in my opinion.
There was some precedent for what they were doing, right? Because like Blood, Sweat, and Tears did the kind of R&B inflected horns and Hammond.
Yeah.
But nobody did what Chicago did to me, and definitely nobody did it better. The musicality, complexity.
And the fact that it was also the first time that you really heard horns in stereo. Because you were always, before that, you know, they always smashed to the sides with a 4-track, you know, whatever. Gercio, that was one of the main things that he was doing, because he started with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and the reason that they got signed to Columbia was because Gercio said, I'm not going to do another Blood, Sweat, and Tears record unless you get these guys Chicago in on this. So...
Oh, how awesome.
That's how they got on the label. But again, he applied that stereo, making the horns a thing. You know, because up until then, it was just a horn section, you know, either mono or to the side somewhere. They weren't split, double tracked, and all of that stuff. So that was one of the reasons that had so much impact, was for that reason, you know.
Oh, that's awesome.
Love it. That was one of my first musical memories. My brother bringing home the first couple Chicago albums, and I just instantly loved it. And that Blood, Sweat, and Tears album too. You know,
that too. The Blood, Sweat, and Tears 2 was amazing.
Yeah.
I just, it's something, I don't know, I must have been a horn player in a former life or something.
Well, it was just musical, you know, and to hear like Dick Halligan's arrangements and Fred's arrangements of the BS&T stuff, it was just phenomenal stuff. And remember, I heard Fire and Rain by Blood, Sweat, and Tears before I heard James Taylor do it. And they did this amazing version on the Blood, Sweat, and Tears 3. Then I heard on the radio James Taylor go, who's this wanker ripping off Blood, Sweat, and Tears? You know, I had no idea. I had it backwards, you know. And now I love James' version, but I mean, at the time, it was. They made. That's the thing about redoing stuff is the reason for doing it is to make it sound like you wrote it. You know, do it different, like Joe Cocker did "Help from My Friends." You know, things like that. You know, and that's
to me, that music was progressive music.
It was.
And like progressive music to me wasn't electric 12 strings and mellotrons and Taurus pedals. It was when it went somewhere else. It was Zappa. And
it took me somewhere.
It's such a treat to play with the horn section too. I occasionally play in a Steely Dan tribute, and we have a full schmear, and it's a powerful sound when it gets rolling. You know?
The right players, man. It's wonderful. Yeah,
super hot stuff. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, I guess we did come here to talk about Kevin. So, how would you, for the uninitiated, how would you describe him and his music? I know that's a hard thing to put into a brief quote, but
are you picking on any one of us in particular, or any
talking? Go ahead.
Me, so I maybe met
Drum
Kevin.
point.
earliest out of the three of us.
Yeah. So go ahead, Stan.
I met him when he was 16 or 17 or something, and he started coming around the recording studio I was working at.
And this was in L.A.?
This was in the Bay Area. This
Okay.
was in Sunnyvale, was where that studio was. And at the time, he was way into musically things he was listening to. He loved UK. He loved the drama record. He loved a lot of singer-songwriter stuff. Like he was a huge Jerry Rafferty fan at that point. So he was kind of a musical sponge. Musically, he could do anything. And for people that don't know, or people that see him as like Kevin, the singing bass player or whatever, his keyboard chops were ferocious. His keyboard chops were just beyond. So he was really capable of doing a lot of things. He and I started playing on some sessions together here and there, and just kind of bumping into each other fairly frequently. Robert Ferris kind of got in around that same time. I met Robert around the same time. So this is like early 80s, maybe, or 82 or something like that. He, in his earlier days, I think Kevin was a good shaper and molder of things. I think he was a good producer of things. I don't think he was like the creative fireball that he kind of turned into later, as far as like being the source of things. So I think he would accumulate people around him who had raw ideas, and he could kind of go and drift. I remember he used to tell me stories about he would pop into the studio late at night. Scotty or somebody stopped into the studio, and Kevin was listening to just different master tapes at like 3 a.m. once. And Scott's like, well, what are you doing? And Kevin's like, oh, I'm inputting. I'm just listening to different projects, getting ideas and things. And so he was really, really good at arranging. He was really good at producing. He taught himself engineering along the way and did a pretty good job of that. I think as he kind of progressed, he went from that sort of earlier gluing things together to more approaching it from a compositional standpoint of knowing what he wants to do compositionally, being more methodical about how to get there. So, and I saw him, I think, go pretty well through that transition. It's like the first Giraffe record, Power of Suggestion, really isn't a Giraffe record so much. It's a collection of songs from a whole bunch of projects. Kevin and I had a band called C Spot Run with Scotty before Giraffe, just post, maybe it was pre-Eddie Money. It was pre-Eddie Money. And then we did the song with Martha Davis, Nightmares, for the TriStar film. So we had some projects. Scott had done some stuff with Kevin. Steve Watts and Jason Hubbard did some stuff with Kevin. Kevin had like lots of little partnerships. And the first Giraffe record has one of the things that was frustrating in the day, but is much better now. And I definitely want to call out the estate for that. Is it's a lot easier to find out what's actually going on those records now. On the first record, it just came out and said that it was done by Kevin, but there's probably 20 people that played on that record. Really, really great players. Oliver Harris is on that record, and there's some really great guitar players, Dan Meblin. So there's lots and lots of stuff that was kind of pulled together. I think by the time the second record came around, I think it was more of a band, but I also think Kevin was compositionally stronger. And so the songs on the second record hang better. Sorry,
what was the second one called?
The View from Here.
That's right.
So I think the band was more firing like a unit at that point, but it was also the beginning of Kevin becoming to be all powerful. In the earlier days, he liked to collaborate with people, and I think needed to collaborate with people just to get enough ideas together to put something together. But by the time we got to The View from Here, he was pretty much like Air Dance is pretty much completely Kevin. He played the guitar stuff on it, he played the keyboard stuff on it, he wrote it. And so, like he was able to go from kind of gluing things together to like composing and creating a whole thing like that I think is a gorgeous piece of music. I think it's amazing. So he changed a lot in the time that I knew him. We, post Giraffe, we had not a falling out, but we just went our own ways, did our own thing for a while. And then we came back together again and did The Lamb in '94 with Dave, of course. But I just watched him. He had a whole progression. I mean, I think he went through a whole bunch of different scenes along the way. The Toy Matinee record for me was huge, was just such an amazing record. And as frankly ticked off as I was about the dissolution of Giraffe, because I wasn't ready to let go of that. I don't think anybody was. As irritated as I was about what happened to Giraffe, the Toy Matinee record made it okay, because that record was so good, I thought. And I got to see a couple of the shows. I saw a couple of the San Jose shows with Marc, and that band killed it. That band absolutely destroyed that music. It was completely wonderful. So yeah, that was a good, a good way to kind of change the energy of that. It's like from being like totally negative and down and like, my whole world blew up, to all of a sudden seeing this amazing thing come out was great.
Very good. And how many Giraffe albums were there total? Just two, or was it
Just two, yeah.
two? And did you play gigs in the area at the time? How did music of that caliber slot in during the late 80s musical scene in California?
Mark can speak to this. There was a lot of cool stuff going on in the Bay Area in that era. There was a lot of really good music going on.
It wasn't just Motley Crue and their ilk.
The Bay Area, maybe. I don't know if it's the
not in the
Silicon
Bay
Valley
Area. That'd be a
influence.
little further south, I guess.
Yeah. I think because of maybe the Bay Area influence, I think there was a lot of quirkier stuff going on and maybe a little bit more, I'm going to get in trouble for saying it, but maybe a little more intellectual or a little more musical or something. I don't think, and people have argued, I don't think Giraffe was really a progressive band through and through. I think we had moments. I think there were some sounds and some things, and I think we were trying to do some new things, and so in that way it was trying to be progressive. But I don't think it was just, we weren't trying to be like a Marillion kind of band or something like that. We were trying to just make the music that we were making, which to me was more modern than that. But there were a lot of really, really good bands and bands that we played with. Kevin put the first record together, and it was a collection of songs from a whole bunch of different projects. And then at the time that happened, he had come off the road with Eddie Money. Scotty and Doug bought the studio that I used to work at, and they renamed it TRS. And they had a grand opening party, and I bumped into Kevin at the grand opening party, and we were talking, and he's like, I miss being in a band. I miss being in a band. Hey, I'm writing some stuff. Hey, I'm writing some stuff. So we started talking. He'd been talking to Scott as well. And this was a year after he and Robert started to put the band together. And I don't know if people know, but the name Giraffe actually comes from Gilbert and Robert A. Ferris, G.I.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So Robert was, and to me, Robert wrote the songs that were the most Giraffe-like. He wrote This Warm Night and World Just Gets Smaller. And those songs were kind of the sonic core of the band, I thought. So Robert was really, really important to the deal, but I think Kevin and Robert had moved on. Kevin had those songs and a couple of others and some stuff from our band, C-Spot Run, and a couple of things with Scotty, Image Maker, and things like that. And he just glued them together into a record, wanted to put the band together. So Scott and I were first in the door. And then Michael Laboud came along, who is amazing. Michael's a really great keyboard player and a very wise old soul. He's just a relaxed, comfortable. He's the guy you want to hang with because everything is always okay with that guy. Musically deep and great feel, great, amazing sounds. Really good with the technology. And then Chris Beveridge was the last guy in, and he was very a wild card. He had just moved from Oregon, and there was another guy, Nate Pitts, that we wanted to get. And Nate was busy, and he went, try this guy, Chris. And Chris came in, and just like Mark said, he did the work. He knew exactly what he needed to do. He had the songs totally cold. So he walked in, and like the first time he played them, he was like the best guy in the room. We were like, I'm still struggling, trying to get my parts and find a keyboard thing and do whatever. And Chris just comes in, he's like, yeah, I got this. So the band kind of started. The early gigs were hard because we were trying to do things that weren't like the typical kind of club band stuff that was going on at that point. There was a lot of 80s music and a lot of kind of sequency, dancey, new wave stuff going on. And we were trying to attract some attention in that realm. Sorry, my phone.
What year was this roughly?
87-ish maybe.
Okay.
And so we started gigging, and not a whole lot happened. We did a lot of gigs. And went through a lot of gear, went through a lot of trying to make the songs kind of work because it was complicated music and there were a lot of sequences and a lot of samples and stuff, and the technology wasn't really set up well for it live. We were dragging like IBM PCs with Roger Powell's texture software and stuff out with us live. So it was pretty crazy. Eventually the shows got better. Some of that stuff was captured on video, which is fun. And then he signed us up for the Yamaha soundcheck thing. And that was kind of the high point of everything. And it was also the door that opened that Kevin went on and then did Toy Matinee.
Right, and explain what that was. That was kind of a contest of some sort?
It was. Yamaha had a thing that in the US it was called Soundcheck, and in other parts of the world it was called like Band Explosion. And it was a worldwide deal. It was a competition. You submitted a tape, and bands from all over would submit tapes. They had a crew of people. Doug Bottleman was one of the Yamaha A&R guys. I know, a good friend of Mark's, I think. And Doug would come around and like listen to the bands. And so They came and listened to us a few times, and they went, "Yeah, we really like you guys. We really like you." Well, they kept coming around, and eventually we got in the finals, which were done at Universal Amphitheater here in LA. And Cheap Trick closed the show for us, so it was fine. But these 8 bands came out and played, and we were all kind of like head-to-head competing. And some really good bands, like Jerry Cortez, my friend who plays with Tower of Power, was in one of the bands. Some really good stuff. And somehow we won that. And then from there, they had a kind of a worldwide competition where each of the bands from, the Australia band, the US band, whatever, all went to Japan. So we went to Japan and played and did a competition there. And we came in, I think, second on that one. So, and Pat Leonard was one of the judges. So Pat was at the Universal Amphitheater show, and I think he saw Giraffe, and I think he was working on the back of his mind on Toy Matinee, and I didn't think he had the singer piece in place yet. So he saw Kevin and went, So got the door open for Kevin. Off he went.
That's very cool. Oh,
Yeah.
I just want to keep peeking in the chat room. Lyle Workman sends his best.
Oh,
Hey, Lyle.
You kind of.
talk about lovely human beings.
Yeah,
He's just got his new record is amazing too, with the orchestra.
Oh, yeah.
At Abbey Road. It's just amazing.
Right.
I used to inherit some of his guitar students when he left with Bourgeois Tag. And they were showing me the stuff that he was teaching them, these impossible chords to make. So that when Toy Matinee, the first time I met Lyle was up at New George's up in Marin County, and he goes, "Hi, I'm Lyle." I said, "Oh, you're the bastard that I had to teach all those damn chords to. You realize my hand is still in spasms from those." Yeah, nobody plays chords better than Lyle.
Yeah, or maybe even music. That guy's just
Well, yeah, that too. Yeah.
astounding.
Hey, Stan, I have a question for you. Sorry,
Yeah.
just to go back. So, Image Maker, which ended up being on Shaming of the True.
Yep.
Wasn't that Kevin liked to rework songs a lot?
Many
Was
times.
that one? Did he have that around from the Giraffe days?
Pre-Giraffe. Scotty and Kevin had that as a song, and the one was actually in a different place. It was originally a Scott and Kevin song, and I think Scotty sang lead on it, and where the one was totally different. Kevin, in his way, went, "Gee, I like it, but I don't like that part, so I'm just going to own it now," and turned it into my thing, and it turned into Image Maker. So
But I
it was
wonder, did it have those lyrics where it's like, "Dump the band, you are the face," that whole thing?
no, that.
Okay.
So I don't know about you guys, but honestly, unabashedly, openly, fully, Kevin is by far my favorite lyricist of, I think, any songwriter that I know. And there's some really good lyricists, but his lyrics, that was his best thing to me. I think he was pretty untouchable lyrically. And yeah, all that stuff was him. All of those kind of, and his
No, but I mean, not that, but like, was it a
well,
lyric?
Are you
that
thinking
happened
about
before?
Are you thinking about the Sweet Fugue thing? Sweet Fugue? Because that's where Dump the Band, You Are the Face.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. Sorry, that is the Sweet Fugue. No, but the whole Image Maker, like, I think there's some other lyrics there where I have to think of that are just about like, setting you up and don't worry about the band or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I think maybe there isn't an Image Maker. Maybe I'm thinking of Sweet Fugue, but anyway, but Image Maker was older. I mean, I just think like I wonder if there was some foreshadowing of this idea of the music industry and being
chewing up and spitting out or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think he was pretty wide-eyed and innocent and excited. I think he went into it full on. And one thing I know about Kevin is he was one of the most success-driven people I've worked with. He really knew that he wanted to go somewhere. And if you were slowing him down at all, you would oftentimes find yourself on an off-ramp somewhere and he'd be gone. So I think he just had this wide-eyed enthusiasm. I think he just really loved, all this stuff. He loved production. He loved writing. Earlier on, I think he was pretty nervous about playing, but I think he got to the point where he loved performing.
Okay, so I mean, by the time I met him, which was right after Toy Matinee, and he was starting, he had the album Thud, and he had a lot of Shaming. At that point, he was already starting to get jaded, really. Yeah.
So he went through a lot at that point, and it's pretty easy, I think, when you go through something like that to see it purely from your perspective. and it's really hard to have a wider worldview and see things from like a whole bunch of different sides. When you're going through something like that, I think you can only really see it from the shoes that you're in. So from Kevin's point of view, I think he felt like he maybe got ground up a little bit. And I think his overall experience was okay. Yeah, and there's a lot of kind of jumbled history. There's a lot of stuff about like what happened and people's perceptions about what happened through, the TMNC kind of era and from the end of Toy Matinee and stuff. There's a lot of music industry stuff that's in there. But I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, other than he went through the thing, right? And he got changed and he got reshaped a little bit by going through that. And he put some of that into the context of songs. And at the time that he was writing that stuff, he was writing it fresh in his boots from when he had those feelings. So I think I caught up with him later. I spent some time with him in 96, kind of late for him in 96. And he was a pretty different guy by then. He was pretty relaxed. His kind of personal attitude on things had kind of changed a little bit. So I think he just went on a journey. And I think wherever he was, I think he kind of talked about it from his perspective or his point of view at that point. But I think he could only see it from the vantage point that he had, if that makes sense.
There was kind of like, if you look at it even just from the outside, from people who didn't even know him, just looking at his catalog of music, but definitely also from people like us who knew him at different, spent time with him in different eras or different points along the timeline, that there was kind of like an evolution of starting off sort of Johnny Virgil-esque, wide-eyed, hopeful, dreaming, driven, to more and more cynicism, dark.
Yeah.
Right. By the time he got to Caviar, it was like, even I was like, we don't want keyboard players with pretty sounds. We want to, make Christy cry now. We're going further into the darkness.
I think he wrote from the perspective of where he lived in any given point in time. And I think he feels like maybe some things didn't go the way he wanted them to go. I know, like for me, like being outside of a lot of that, at the end of Giraffe, I was pretty bitter. I was pretty ticked off because I wasn't ready for that to occur. That was a shock and a surprise. We had some momentum and we had some plans and things were going, and Kevin came in and announced what was happening, and I was kind of like devastated for a while. And then the Toy Matinee record came out. But if you look at it from Kevin's perspective, he had the Giraffe band. He went from that to Toy Matinee with Pat Leonard and got to work with Tim Pierce and Guy Pratt and Brian. He brought Brian McLeod with him. And then he went from that to the band that had Mark and Unbelievable, and Toss was in that band. And, so it's like he stepped it up each time. Each time he went, he got himself to a different level and was able to work with people that were able to do bigger and better things. I think part of his thing was, whereas I felt a little bit, jilted's the wrong word, but I felt a little bit kind of left behind. Looking at it from Kevin's point of view, he stepped up every time and he got better and better and better. And as his songwriting chops got better, as his singing chops got better, that's a whole journey for him too. He had people around him who were able to kind of sustain him at that level and keep going. But again, I think, if he were going to go back now, I think, and revisit a lot of that stuff, I think his perspective would be different. When I was in the throes of the end of Giraffe, I was bitter and pissed off. But now I can look back at it and go, oh no, there was actually really good stuff that happened. And there was good stuff that came for me out of that. I think the music that he made post that was really good. So I think his perspective on it might be different now than like the bitter. Like, I don't think he would have continued to get darker and bitter and angrier.
How autobiographical do you think shaming is? Or is it?
A lot of the shaming, not a lot, but some of the shaming stuff goes back a long way. Because of You was a Giraffe song. Actually, Because of You was a song Kevin and I worked on kind of pre-Giraffe.
That's on Thud. That's not on shaming.
Oh, that's on Thud. You're right. Okay. But that started off. So yeah, Dave mentioned that he had a way of reworking things. So the one that gets me, Sean, is Song for a Dead Friend. That's always the one that makes me, right. I know. But I'm saying, just talking about songs and the autobiographicalness of Kevin's stuff. That's always the one that throws me for a loop. I don't know about was Kevin Johnny Virgil? He probably felt a little bit that way. He probably felt like he got some of the record company stuff. I know some of the Suite Fugue stuff was kind of his perception about what it was like dealing with labels in a post-Toy Matinee world and trying to get Thud somewhere. So I think he had Thud before he had a label deal, before he got PRA together, and I think he was kind of shopping it, and I think he had some level of frustration. So yeah, maybe he wrote some of that stuff about that.
And I would take it that was quite Gentle Giant inspired. I actually
right, based off of On Reflection.
Yeah, that whole vocal chorale.
Where do I use you? Yeah.
Did I really abuse you?
Yeah.
That's right. I actually interviewed Derek Shulman a few weeks ago and asked him if he was familiar with that, and he said no. And I was thinking, well, it was written with you in mind almost.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, interesting.
Pretty wild stuff.
He needs to hear it.
Yeah.
So where did the Eddie Money gig slot in timeline-wise?
Yeah. So that was interesting. That's another one of those life lessons for me.
Were you in the band too?
Well, for a minute.
Okay.
And what happened was Kevin started to go to UCLA for about 4 seconds, and or maybe USC, one of those two. And while he was down there, he lived at this house called the Pata Guys. And the Pata Guys was a bunch of kind of up-and-coming film people. Shane Black was one of the Pata Guys. And Shane Black wrote the script for Lethal Weapon and a bunch of other stuff. One of the guys in the Pata Guys was dating Martha Davis, the lead singer for the Motels. And Shane, I think, got a deal to do a film with TriStar, kind of a horror movie called Night of the Creeps. And he needed some music for it. Martha was there at the house. Kevin was there at the house. Kevin had this wonderful way of going, hey, I've got some music. You want to hear it? Here, I'm playing it. What do you think? What do you think of that? And he would just kind of push things. So I'm sure there was music around a lot. And I think he had the opportunity. So he landed this thing. He landed getting this song in this movie that he was going to work on with Martha. So he came back to San Jose and said, okay, I got this song. Do you want to help me with it? And I said, sure. He goes, I don't know exactly what we're going to do. I think Kevin wrote it. I don't think Martha was involved in the writing. I think it was all Kevin. But the two of us recorded it. I think Steve Watts played drums. Scotty might have played a couple things, but Kevin and I did all of the sort of guitar, bass, keyboards, and production and recorded it. We came to LA. I recorded Martha's vocal. And that ended up being in the Night of the Creeps. Well, Martha was working on a record, a Motels record with Richie Zito producing. And they were working at Fantasy. And Martha's like, you guys have to come by and meet Richie. And we're like, okay. So we go to Fantasy and we met Richie and John Nelson. Awesome John Nelson was the guitar player in Eddie Money's band at that point. John was there. And he said, hey, well, I'm putting together a band for Ed. Once this record comes out, we're going to tour. Why don't you guys give me a call? So we're like, okay, that's cool. We go back, do our separate stuff. Next thing I know, I get a phone call from Kevin. Hey, I'm in LA. I'm in Eddie's band. And I'm like, wait, what? And they're asking about you, so can you come down and audition? And I went, sure. So I jumped in my little truck and threw my gear in the truck and drove down. And it's one of those awesome moments. It's like a good life learning thing. But I auditioned. They're like, great. And you do the homework. You learn the stuff, right? You don't go in with a not full deck, as Marc said. And so I kind of had the parts down, knew the songs, had the sounds together. The band was really fun. They had a back line of all high watt at that point. So that was really fun.
Really
and so I was there for probably a couple of weeks. Ed was not there. Ed was enjoying a spa vacation at that point. And we would rehearse, we'd rehearse. And it was like, Ed's almost out. He'll be here. So we spent a couple of weeks working on that stuff. The band's tight. We're there. Okay, you guys are the guys. Do whatever you got to do. So I'm like, yeah, I got to quit my job. And then at the very last minute, John called me and goes, hey, you know what? Hate to do this to you, but we found a guy that we like just a little bit better, who was Tommy Gervin, who was a LA-based guitar player. And Tommy was a great guitar player and a ridiculously great singer. And I was not a ridiculously great singer. So I think he had a little bit of an edge. So again, for me, it was like, that close. It was really cool. I went back to the Bay Area and continued to do stuff. Kevin went out with Ed, with John and Tommy and those guys. And had his thing there. I think when he came off the road from that, he was totally hungry to do something, because I think he was tired of playing those songs, tired of playing somebody else's music, wanted to get somewhere with his career. So that was sort of what led to the forming of Giraffe.
Okay, so that predates Giraffe.
Yeah, predates Giraffe. And C Spot Run happened before that. And Scotty Smith and Doug Hopping had an advertising company in the Bay Area called Cal Spots. And Kevin did a lot of work for them. I did some work for them as well. So Kevin and I would sometimes be on the same sessions. Sometimes we'd be like passing each other in the night. So yeah, it was everything was kind of intertwined. And a lot of music got put together before Eddie Money that later ended up going into the Giraffe record, and then it ended up being on Thud or on Shaming.
What was your guitar rig like back then?
Oh, wow. I'm curious about Marc's impression of this too. So I gave up on amps in the early 80s, and I started developing a way to kind of go direct. And so I developed a cabinet emulator and kind of an amp simulator really early on. So like all the sounds on the Giraffe records are just guitar direct through this preamp into the board.
I use that on Hit and Run.
Yes, and I know.
Hit and Run.
Yeah, and I gave one to Kevin, and I think Kevin made everybody that he ever worked with play through that thing, whether they wanted to or not, whether they liked it or not.
Well, I remember Marty Friedman had reviewed the album, and he said the guitar solo in Hit and Run, the tone, I wouldn't be brave enough to do that tone, is what he said, because it was so clean and precise, but it was because of that box. It just had this great bite to it, but it had a lot of great depth to it. So.
Yeah. So I had a rack rig probably at the end of the 70s, and Giraffe was totally a rack rig, but it was all direct. So like my thing was always full range monitor system. I had like basically a mini PA on stage with me, which the other guys in Giraffe will tell you was never loud enough. Those guys always said I needed to turn no, actually it's the opposite of that. But I had a decent sized sound system on stage and everything. And that was convenient too, because I played keyboards also. So it was nice to be able to run keyboards and guitar and acoustic guitar and everything through the same system. But that was the 80s for me. So I kind of got back to amps are cool again. Right after Giraffe, I went back to Marshalls and stuff. And
do you really think all that rack stuff sounded that hot in retrospect compared to just a good tube amp and a decent pedal board?
Depends. I know there were a lot of horrible rack setups. There were a lot of things that were wired really poorly, and they were super noisy. And a lot of guys that had racks didn't exercise a lot of taste a lot of times. So like you were prone to excess. But there were definitely some rigs that could sound good. I think the technology was okay. I just think it was like a license to excess. Okay. And a lot of those sounds were kind of, the tri-stereo chorus, super thick stereo delays, that kind of stuff was a moment in time. And at the time,
a lot of that stuff just kind of, a lot of that stuff is like, it sounds great in the practice room, but then it just gets swallowed up live, doesn't it?
Sean, you got to understand one thing, okay? And it has to be said. When you're talking to Stan, you're not just talking to any ordinary guitar player. This is a guy who's like a genius engineer. I don't mean audio engineer. I mean engineer. He's designed consoles for Neve. He's, works with Fender. And just, he created his own rack. And actually, I think I ended up with one of those Q boxes, Stan Cotey.
You did,
boxes.
Yeah. There were only a couple of them.
Yeah. And we should model it, make a plug-in actually out of it. It was great. So, I mean, when you have the understanding of electronics that Stan had and the ear and the taste, he was able to make things to his own taste. Like Robert Fripp used to make things like Frippertronics and things. Certain people just, made it work. And then, what you're talking about with racks and the 80s and stuff, a lot of that was like off the shelf stuff that was just, even with keyboards, like some things, like I was saying, some of the digital keyboards, it's like, be careful. Once you get your hands on a DX7, you don't have the luxuries of, sounding good like you did with a Prophet 5. There's some real, cheesy sounds that will not stand the test of time. But Stan's custom gear, probably does. I mean, I don't know where that stuff is now. I think it might have gone to Mark McCray. Somebody has.
Some of it's in my garage. Mark has. I'm in a band with Mark, by the way. I love Mark McCray.
Yeah, Mark's in the chat room. Say hi to Mark.
Oh, cool. Hey, Mark's wonderful. The other thing for me is, as big as my rack was, I never used very much of it at any one time. it's like there may be a delay on.
I always heard you had a big rack too, but
He does now.
Okay. So yeah, it's always just a question of trying to do something,
And what was your main guitar back then?
Oh,
You still got it, huh?
oh yeah. There's a Northern California luthier.
Zebra or the Giraffe guitar. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
named Michael Dolan, who does amazing work. He made a bass for Chris. He made
That's
several
awesome.
guitars for me. I don't know if you can see, but there's a little.
Yeah.
Giraffe on the
Yeah.
The 12th fret.
Oh,
Yeah, that's
That's a
awesome.
little hand-sawn Giraffe.
very nice.
So, and it's funny because people see this guitar and they go, "Oh, it's a shred guitar," but it's not. It's Tele pickups. It's a stock strap
Yeah.
bridge.
Yeah,
Um,
very nice.
so I used this a lot. I had another Michael Dolan guitar that was also kind of Fendery at the time, and I have a Michael Dolan acoustic that is stunning. It's the guitar I recorded with a lot. It's totally a unique instrument. In fact, I got to go get it. Hang on.
You'd open up the toy box, Sean. So
I know, man. Mark, did you have a rack back then too?
yeah. Because I used, I was in a band with Dave Nolan and Don Frank called JC and the Twisters that we had in San Jose, which is where I met Kevin and Keith. And I had a rack that was just a pain to have to load. It was about as big, went up to my chest and had a mixer, but it had a lot of gear in it, like a lot of rack-mounted synths, because I had a guitar synth, and I would emulate piano and flugelhorn and all different types of stuff in there.
Which one?
As well as having an amp. So, yeah.
Which guitar synth?
It was the GM70.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then
Oh,
I triggered a few different. I don't remember now. It's we go through so much gear. It's hard unless I see a photo of it. I go, oh, that's right. I used to have. Yeah, you can't remember all this
Sure.
stuff. I remember the shit I sold that I shouldn't have. That I do remember because I wake up nightly sweating about it. Why did I get rid of that? And,
Exactly.
But other than that, yeah.
So you got the acoustic there, Stan.
Yeah, so this is a really unusual thing. This is made by this guy, Michael Dolan, and it's really weird. For one, it's a 24-fret neck, and it's
Wow.
got a kind of a Klein-like bridge. It's pretty beautifully figured.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no truss rod. The guy, at the point that Michael did this, like you could look at the headstock angle,
That's
Yeah.
really.
and it's totally like inlaid brass.
Wow.
There we go. And if you look at it, the whole thing is a hippie sandwich. So it's very alembic-y
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
all the way down. And Michael came from Alembic. So he built this, and this guitar just kills. It's just a wonderful, amazing, fun guitar to play.
Strum a couple chords
Pretty.
for us.
Sure. So probably doesn't come across particularly well.
Yeah,
but
it's almost like there's a gate on this or something.
yeah. The wonders of internet audio.
Yeah.
Mark, what did you use in Toy Matinee? Because your live sounds were really good.
From what I recall, and again, it's been a lot of years. I had an AC30.
Yep.
And then a Fender Princeton.
Was it a
like
Princeton chorus?
A little Princeton, like a Princeton chorus.
Yeah.
I don't remember what my foot pedals were, but it was those main two amps. I think is what I used for Toy Matinee.
You sounded
there
great.
was a distortion or whatever in it. But yeah, from my recollection, I think those are the two amps that I had. I may have used a Fender Basement at the same time. Also, the Tweed. Yep. The big Tweed thing too. I think those three.
Yeah, your live tones totally worked for that. You pulled that off really, really nicely. And
well, that's a big credit goes to Tim Pierce because he was the one that came up with so many of those wonderful parts, and that was the one thing that I always would always try to straighten the record on because people thought I did the record and I didn't do the record. He goes, "I did your record," and I always thought, hope Tim's not thinking I'm taking
walking around going, "Yeah, that was me."
Because every time I would correct somebody saying that, and then it would inevitably get printed anyway. Toy Matinee guitarist Marc Bonilla. It's like, no, that was Tim Pierce that did that. I did the live stuff,
Yep.
So I would always try to take great pains in setting that record straight because Tim deserves all the credit in the world for those wonderful parts and tones and things that he did on that.
Yeah, tell us a bit about the album. I mean, I know you guys weren't on it, but as much as you know about how it all kind of came down the pike and got put together and then the need to, the record company kind of not paying attention to it and him having to put a band together.
Well, if I came in after the fact. I came in right at the end after they had gotten the record done, and because Kevin and I met up in San Jose, actually through Keith Emerson. I was playing with JC and the Twisters at the
That's
Britannia.
right. And Kevin had done some stuff with Keith, right?
Well, he was currently doing stuff with Keith. He was up there. Keith had just gotten into town. I don't know how they connected, but I was playing, and I was working with Ronnie Montrose doing demos for what became Double E Ticket, and so we were in this place in Almaden, which is San Jose, called the Britannia Arms, and I'm playing white noise. We learned it, and then I see this guy come into the back of the house, or the back of the club, and it looks like Keith Emerson. I'm like, yeah, right. Just looks like him. It's not going to be Keith. And we finished the song, and sure enough, he comes up to introduce himself. And then at that point, that I'm looking at him, going, it is Keith Emerson. What, So he introduces himself like he needed to, and said, what was that last song you did? And I said, that was White Noise. And he goes, that's a good song. Are you going to record it? And I said, yeah. And he goes, do you mind if I play piano on it? And I looked at him and I just said, well, what have you done? Like a joke, right? And he goes, well, I was in a band called The Nice, and then I had a band called EL. I said, stop. I know who you are. I have posters up in my bedroom, okay? I know. Of course you can play on it, And he asked me to go water skiing the next day, which would not have been the next thing I would have expected to come out of his mouth, was let's go water skiing. But we did. We went water skiing, and at that point he said, I'm working with this guy, Kevin Gilbert, and we're doing an album, and I'm looking for the right guitar player. You seem to be the right guy. So went in and met Kevin, and Kevin didn't know who the hell I was. Like, who are you bringing in? So whatever it was that I played, the first thing out, Kevin stopped the tape and he went, play that again immediately. That was exactly what so we locked in right away, and we went to dinner that night and found out, I think I'd used a reference because I liked things dry at that point. I didn't like a lot of reverb. And I think at dinner I said something like, we don't want the track sounding like the end of Pleasant Valley Sunday. And Kevin just started laughing. He goes, I can't believe that. I used that expression. You're talking about I said, yeah. And he goes, you like the Monkees? I said, oh shit, man, I'm a huge Monkees fan. I love the Monkees. He goes, me too. I'm just afraid to admit it to anyone, So we were both like huge Monkey fans, but you don't admit that to your prog friends, It's just one of those things you closet that record, But then we found out we were General Giant, all these different bands we had. So we worked on a few different projects back and forth, and then he had me come down to LA to work on something down there, and then I had him come up, and then he said, I'm putting this band together, it's Toy Matinee, and this was when I moved down to do Double E Ticket. I was living at his house, and he said, we need to put a band together. Are you into going to Japan? And so I said, sure, let's go. And so that was the beginning. We went as a duo. Then on the way back, we became a trio with Spencer Campbell on bass, did a radio tour. And Spencer, I don't know how much you know about Spencer, but he's an absolute jewel of a human being, and the most easygoing cat in the world. Looked great, played his ass off. And then when we got back, we decided to go as a full band, and so we added Toss Panos on drums and Sheryl Crow on keyboards and backing vocals, and that's how. And then we went out with that. So it kind of compounded, from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, So that's how that band was put together, as far as that goes. And Pat wasn't part of that because he went to England to work on Amused to Death, producing Roger Waters. And so, but Warner said, we need to tour this band. We just broke the record. Mark and Brian are all over it on LA radio. We need to keep the momentum up. And I think Pat and Kevin weren't getting along at some point. That was always a love-hate relationship, that I tried to stay well out of, And so we did a number of dates, and I think that there was some issues where we had to stop touring because whatever, I'm not going to get into that. But So that was the end of the live band. You know, we did a string of dates and then moved on to other things. And I think part of that, you know, again, as the guys were saying, contributed to Kevin's increasingly cynical outlook of the industry, which I think in part was well-founded, because there were a lot of, you know, when you start to get into the machinations of this stuff, and you realize, as one of my buddies had once said, that the industry is run on paranoia, but what ultimately trumps paranoia is stupidity, and what actually wins up, or no, I believe it was greed, and then whatever trumps greed is stupidity. I mean, these guys had no idea what was going on. They didn't know where to place Toy Matinee. Part of the time we were in the religious section because there was a nun on the front. People thought it was like religious music. And then they would go home and hear "Greetings from Sodom" was their first lyric. And then they would get calls to, bitching. Well, now you guys have got problems. It's like, dude, you listen to the record you're promoting, try to find a place. So there was a lot of that rampant, just cluelessness going on at the record companies. And they were supposed to be an artist label. And these were some of the things, and I was party to a lot of that stuff on my records when I was on Debris, some dumb, clueless moves that they did, that for another day. But I think that's what, where Kevin started to get disillusioned from the fact that, we had all this great momentum, we had a great band. I mean, we played the Roxy, and Jeff Lynne comes up to us and says, "This is the best band I've ever heard in my life." And he goes, "Well, you've heard the Beatles." Says, "No, this is the best band I've ever heard." And now when you get Jeff Lynne saying that, okay, so, it's like, okay, I'll take that. But, we had all this momentum, and we had, and it was a good band. We all got along great, and it was a really great experience for everybody. Just to be caught up, completely just cut off at the knees, So, and I think that was the first step in Kevin's descent into cynicism because of that. And I don't blame him for it. I really don't.
Where does this Tuesday Night Music Club slot in this timeline?
Well, that happens after where, Kevin had gotten his place next to Bill Bottrell. There was the lawnmower place over in Pasadena off of Lake. Yeah. And that's where we would do, Kevin and I did a lot of work on a really terrible show called Dark Justice, which was, the soundtrack, right? But it was great because we shared the same distorted sense of humor, very dark sense of humor. That's one of the things that bonded us together a lot, was we had a very dark, we came from a very dark place with humor. And so at one point we had to do a mariachi band in the background of one of the scenes, right? So we got together and did this thing. And then I said, "Look, here's what we need to do." And he goes, I know, we're gonna write lyrics, and we're gonna have them in Spanish. And it was basically, and I called my dad, because my dad's Spanish, and I said, "Okay, we've got lyrics. Can you translate these into Spanish?" And it was basically panning the show, how shitty the show was, how the writing was sucked, and it's like, why are we doing this? Why is this show still on the air? But it was done like, but it was these lyrics that pan the show. So anybody that spoke Spanish would go, "What the hell are they saying in the background there?" They're it was just one of those private jokes. It was called Justicio Obscuro. It's on, you can find it. I've got tapes of it, but it's just, those are the things that kept us going, because we just hated what we were doing, because just this awfulness, But that started at Lawnmower Studios, and so we ended up getting together and jamming. Different. We would jam on Tuesday nights. It was just something that Kevin thought of. Let's do this, and Bottrell would come in, play guitar, and the rule was that you couldn't play on the instrument that you were good at. You had to play on, like, I couldn't play guitar. I'd have to play piano. Kevin would play drums, and so we couldn't do that. And, and Sheryl was involved in there because she's a really good keyboardist. She was really good, classically trained. A lot of people don't know that, but she was great, but she couldn't play, so she played guitar. I played keyboards. Everybody had to switch off on what they were weak at. And that's how the Tuesday Night Music started to come about. But I bowed out. In hindsight, I should have stuck with it. I'd be a lot richer. But I was starting to get disconcerted with the company that was coming in to do some of this. I didn't like some of the people. I didn't like the vibe. I was getting at the time, and I decided, I'm gonna bow out of this. I'm gonna go out and do other things, and that's where Kevin and I parted company at that point. There was never any hostility. It was just like, we just like with Stan, you just start going different paths to pursue your own individual stuff. And if you meet up later on for some things, then it's all good. But so that's were the origins of the Tuesday Night Music Club. And I think that's, again, where Kevin took exception, because at the first Grammy Awards, they were giving all the credit to Sheryl. And when it was actually an ensemble that wrote those songs, and I think that really was the point where Kevin just had it, with the industry, and the fact that he wasn't getting the credit that he deserved for helming that stuff and for creating the environment for creativity that was there, that spawned it, because they did a full album. Kevin and did a full album for A&M that A&M completely turned down of Sheryl's, because it was middle of the road, and it wasn't anything special.
That was the Hugh Padgett record.
Yeah. But this stuff was much more organic, and having Bill Bottrell there to also direct it and all that, it became this great thing that was defined a whole era of music to come. Very much like it was just it was a very cool thing, very Ricky Lee Jones in nature, as far as the throwaway delivery and all of those things. It was new, and but I don't think Kevin ever got the credit for spawning that and being the catalyst for that. So
yeah, he told me at the time when he was trying to get a deal for Thud, women were like, hey, who knew? Women, how awesome. And the music industry was completely, it had swung completely.
Right.
And he, I think, that record had a big hand in getting all that stuff going. The Lilith Fair, all the artists that that whole thing. Yeah. So in a sense, he kind of was at the root of the thing that
he was at the root of it. It was his idea, him and Bill, and that's the thing. And he never got, whether he got songwriting splits or not, it always seemed to be that he wasn't getting the credit for the things that he was pioneering and the things that he did.
Yeah.
It wasn't coming back like it should have for him,
Yeah, and that contributed to his bitterness. I mean, we did a song called Leaving Miss Broadway, which was never really released on a record. And we kind of worked on that together as a band. There were a few songs that we worked together as a band, because Thud was a similar thing. The actual live band Thud, which originally had Toss and then Nick DiVirgilio. Yeah. Brian McLeod was the main drummer on the record. So the live guys were always different than, the studio guys, or he played.
Corky was in that, right?
Yeah, Corky James, and then eventually Russ Parrish. Yeah. And then I played keyboards in both, but he played the keyboards on the record, and then we did some extra stuff, like we did Kashmir, we did Smash, which ended up being on Shaming of the True, but but the song Leaving Miss Broadway was one of several songs that had a serious dig into Sheryl. Yeah. But especially that song, it was just blatant. But yeah, he was bitter about it. But then, we actually, Thud, a lot of people don't know this, but we played on a Sheryl song. It was so weird. And of all things, it was a cover of The Joker for a movie soundtrack called Pompadour of Love. So, but the irony is that Leaving Las Vegas was kind of based on The Joker. So it was sort of like, and you're just going to go right into the heart of the monster and do The Joker. Yeah. But I remember when he would always at Lawnmower, because we were working at Lawnmower a lot, and I lived with Kevin just down the street. Well, when I first started working with Kevin, he was living at the studio, just in the corner, and I'm like,
what year was that, Dave, roughly?
That
93?
was 93.
And then you guys got the castle in Eagle Rock, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we ended up. I said, let's get a place. I needed to move too, especially if I was going to work there, because it was out in Pasadena. And
where were you living at the time?
West. What?
Where were you living at the time?
I was living, when I first met Kevin, I was living in Studio City.
Oh, okay.
I had a really cool house that I shared with other musicians, including Gavin Lurston, a bunch of musicians and people who went on, engineers and stuff like this. Rob Stiglitz ended up being an engineer at 5150 for Van Halen. Gavin Lurson was our roommate. He ended up being a multi-Grammy winning mastering engineer. And so it was this cool house on stilts that shook. And actually I met Kevin. I knew about Kevin through Mark McCrite, but who had just, he was like your friend who was an encyclopedia of music and like gave you mixtapes. Like, you need to check out this, you need to check out this, you need to. And so one of them was Kevin, Toy Matinee. But then Kevin called me out of the blue because I had Mellotrons and he had heard about my keyboards and stuff. And he wanted to come see my studio. And he came there and in Studio City in 93. And I played him some of my music, and he said, we should get a bunch of guys together and play the Lamb. That's the first thing he said to me, Stan. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, let's do it, And then a few months later, whenever he called me to be in his solo band, and he didn't have anybody else, he didn't know any other keyboard players. So he said, you're auditioning, but I don't know any other keyboard players. So why don't you just come on down? And Pete Thorne was the other person, awesome Pete Thorne.
Oh, I love Pete.
Yeah, he was the other guitar player who auditioned with Corky. And I found, and then Toss was there. So it was just two guitar players auditioned. That was it. And I loved them both. But, I felt bad for Pete because I thought, I love Corky and everything too. So, but it was, it was kind of like, oh man, I was looking forward to, whoops. Can you hear me? Sorry, my phone is like on this. Anyway, but yeah, so, fuck. Sorry. If I go, I think the battery on my phone, I have it plugged in, but it seems to be, so then we ended up, doing that stuff live, and then it became like a different animal. That was kind of a cool thing. Like, I guess I didn't get the chance to actually see Toy Matinee with Mark and everybody, but I've seen videos and then people have been to the shows, it's that kind of like, this band is amazing, and Kevin had, I would say, amazing live bands, even though he had incredible lineups in the studio too. And he was great at playing a lot of instruments himself and stuff. His live bands, like, for instance, I didn't know that about Jeff Lynne saying that, but I could totally picture it. But when we did The Lamb with Stan, myself, Nick DiVirgilio, Dan Hancock, and Kevin, of course, Bill Bottrell mixed it live, which was crazy.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. And then after the show, he said, this should be your band, a band. Like, this is an incredible band. And the response from that audience, of course, we were playing The Lamb, as music, but the response.
Yeah, but you could have sucked, though.
And
they wouldn't have responded, right? Yeah. So in actuality, it was probably a harder get because they knew what the bar was. Yeah, and you apparently at least matched it, if not exceeded it. So
I think, like, understandably, a Prog audience, this is Prog Fest 94, is going to be more particular. They know the notes. They know what and especially if it's like a classic album, you're going to attempt sacrilege from the start. They start with their arms folded. But I remember when we did it at the end of our abridged Lamb, and then we went into Watcher of the Skies, which just kind of was my idea. Because Genesis did that later on, and the end of it is not a very exciting ending, but the transition to Watcher is a great moment on 3 sides live, the 4th side live. And so we did it, and man, you can hear it in the recording, but to be on stage is probably one of the best moments of my life musically. The 2,000 people in there, every single one of them just thrilled and screaming their heads off. And then at the very end, that big sort of Genesis, bam, and going, I was like, okay, that's what it's like to be Genesis on stage. Mm-hmm. And in retrospect too, I'm glad we got to share that with Kevin, because that was a dream of his. Like I said, the first thing he said when he met me, and I thought it was half kidding. I didn't know. I was like, yeah, let me know. And then here we actually did it, and and then Thud also was a great band, and when we played those songs live, like Joytown was completely different animal. Live, like live at the Troubadour is like, you can really hear the Thud band doing it, versus the album where, there's almost a different philosophy. The album philosophy was let's put tea towels on the drums and make this thing just sound quirky and like almost kind of like the Tuesday night music club where it's like, no, you switch and you play this and don't play very well. And, and then by the time we had Nick DiVirgilio, who's an incredible drummer, and Russ, who's a great guitar player, who's also, by the way, Satchel from Steel Panther. Yeah. He's a character. And, and me with my sort of, prog roots, we would just go muso with it, as much as Kevin would allow, and still have that kind of grungy, whatever alt rock thing he was going for, but definitely like more prog. And I thought, and I would say, it's hindsight's 2020 and whatever, like who knows what would happen if you had been around to evolve into, you died when he was 30 or 29. I mean, but I think any one of those bands, original Giraffe, had it continued, Toy Matinee, especially the live band version, and Thud band, the live version, or even Giraffe, the second, the Lamb Giraffe, if any of those bands had actually like written together and worked as a band and made records as a band, it would have been one of the best ever, I think, strangely enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had a way of attracting talented people, I think. I'll exclude myself from that, but everybody else.
Why would you exclude yourself from
that? All right, I won't exclude myself.
Come on, Stan.
But Lyle Workman played on some stuff. It's like he brought in amazing people. He had this really good ability to be a magnet for that stuff. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Dave, Giraffe was a really different band than the records. Giraffe had its own identity live, and everybody that was in Giraffe brought a little piece with them. And so the collection of that stuff.
Well, and I think that's a credit to Kevin too, because when you bring in guys that are that good, you're wasting potential if you don't give them some playground.
Yeah. Because
it'll only make the project better, and plus what it's going to do is it's going to make you think in different areas that maybe you didn't think of. You assemble guys that you respect, and you get out of their way to some degree. And you let them bring what they do to the table, and that's why you get a different band. Like Dave was saying, the Thud band live and the Thud record were two different entities, and as well they should be, because otherwise, stay home and listen to the record if that's what you want to do. Yeah. There's no reason to try to replicate everything live. I've never been party to that particular outlook. That no, if you go to see a live band, it should be different. Weather Report doing Birdland as a shuffle, as opposed to as a duple, was great. Yeah. It was like, wow, wouldn't expecting that. Well, exactly, because it's live. That's you have to do things differently. That's the beauty of live performance.
Yeah, part of the value proposition of that.
Yeah, and so when you would surround yourself with players that could play, you let them do what they do, and then you build off of that. And so that's an essential accoutrement to any band leader, or anybody that's getting somebody together.
So how did this timeline go? Did you do the Lamb and then he recorded Thud and then he got the Thud band together, or how did it go?
No. He, when I met him and he asked me to, put together a live show, Thud wasn't even out yet. But he had it. And we have been listening to it, and I helped him out with a few things. I didn't really actually play on it. I played on the single that came with it, but like I suggested a different arrangement of the songs, and I regret it. I shouldn't have said it, but it was my idea to put When You Give Your Love to Me first. Originally, Goodness Gracious was first, and I don't know what my philosophy was, but he went with that, and then I actually, in retrospect, I think it was better with Goodness Gracious first. But he played me most of Shaming as well. So he had Shaming and Thud mostly done. I mean, he pretty much had Thud done, and Shaming was still sort of an ongoing thing that he was still working on for a while. He had like half of Shaming, of what you hear in Shaming, with Toss on drums, actually. And then I think Nick, later on, even post Thud, and then I think post, after he had gone, replaced tracks and worked up songs. And I think they took Smash from one of our live shows because it was never recorded in the studio with me on it and the other guys. And and then or something like that. I don't know. Like there was a lot of that, but yeah, no. What happened was we had Thud with Corky and Toss, myself and Kevin, and we were playing. We were playing before the album came out, and it wasn't a PR. We were working with PRA at that time still, though, just wasn't released yet, or even when it was just released, it was like to crickets. I mean, and Kevin and I did a bunch of acoustic shows. They weren't even marketing it as like the guy from Toy Matinee. I mean, we played one Toy Matinee song. We did Jenny Ledge, our own sort of hillbilly version of it or whatever, and sort of rough version. And one guy came up to us, we're playing like at the Mint or something, whatever, and said, "Man, you sound just like that guy from Toy Matinee." And he was like, "I am the guy from Toy Matinee." So it was like, and then it wasn't actually until we got on Mark and Brian and played him Kashmir, and that whole story was, we were supposed to be on that Inconium record, the Led Zeppelin tribute that Atlantic Records did, and long story short, they wanted the A&R guy. We were supposed to even have a record deal with that label, and then the A&R guy wanted, this is like, I think at that time Kevin had won a Grammy with Sheryl, and so he had asked, which is, if you would do a duet with Sheryl, and I think Kevin told him something like "fuck off," and then just like that, we were off the tribute record.
Diplomacy wasn't one of Kevin's strong suits when it came to the record companies, and I think that's it. That turned around to bite him in the ass, because he needed to be able to play ball a little bit better, and oftentimes he would just speak his mind, knowing that he was fully right and justified in what he thought. But at the same time, it's like, you can't always do that. You got to put a little filter in once in a while if you want to get to the next level. And I think that was one of Kevin's shortcomings, is he basically spoke his mind, and didn't matter who was listening,
Yeah. This is, by the way, there's that rumor that he had gotten the audition for Genesis when Genesis was looking to replace Phil Collins. And like I said, I work with those guys. I know Nick Davis really well, who ran the auditions. In fact, I helped Nick DiVirgilio get the gig playing drums on there in a weird way. It was a fun story. But the reality is that that's not the case, that they had gotten his tape and that he was allowed to audition. That's how far it actually went. But, a lot of people who don't know Kevin say like, "Oh, what could have been?" And people who know Kevin, and especially if or you have a sense of even just watching interviews with like Mike and Tony, there's no way those personalities would have mixed. Kevin absolutely would have said, I mean, look, when we said something that pissed him off, when we played The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Kevin and I, right before the show, went into the studio, and I did my Casey Kasem. That was me. I did the "Hi, I'm Casey Kasem," and we played a faster version, sped up version of "Invisible Touch," as Rail walked down to the stage with a boombox, and then smashed it to get applause so we could play the old stuff. And actually, that ended up being sent to them through somebody. Maybe through me, actually. And then I asked Nick what they thought of it. I don't know if you know this, Stan. And the answer back then was they were very amused. So I don't think they were. I think they didn't get past, like, they probably heard that, like, what the fuck? Then, they heard the line, okay, these guys are good, but, next, I don't think Kevin, so I agreed, Mark. I mean, Kevin had no filter. He would just speak his mind. Yeah. Very opinionated.
Yeah, and it
usually
worked
right
against him in a lot of ways, with the label, because he would go in and demand certain things that he wasn't quite ready to, that in their eyes, his status wasn't to the point where you could demand these types of things. So it is what it is. It's all a learning process, and but I do think that it worked against him in a lot of instances. So.
And what was the timeline like with like the Grammys and all that, and then his demise? Was it shortly thereafter, or was there like a year or two that passed?
He had no. I mean, so when I was working with him in Thud, he was constantly complaining about Sheryl, And
Were they still well? How it's like they were an item. Then he brought it to the Tuesday.
Yeah,
Night
in
Club.
Toy Matinee. Yeah, again, I'm not going to get into the details of this. It's not fair if certain parties aren't here to defend themselves. But it became an item. Her and him became boyfriend and girlfriend, and I saw where it was going, and it was right before we were going to go in to do American Matador, and Kevin and I had rewritten a tune that he had done in a band called NRG called Mephisto that we went back and I wrote like a second part to it, or I wrote about half of it. He wrote he had already written. So we worked on that, but I saw what was going on, and I didn't really foresee a happy ending with this. But it's very difficult to tell someone that who's in the middle of it, it doesn't have the advantage of hindsight or objectivity at that point,
Yeah, they only see it from where they are.
Well, of course, yeah. And so I tried to broach the subject with him at a restaurant one time, and got met with some opposition, and decided, well, I think I'm gonna bow out of here, because I didn't want that kind of energy for my second record. They allowed me to make a second record, reprise, and they handed me a lot of money to do it. I wanted to make sure that it was going to be a good experience. So I told Kevin, I said, look, I think I'm going to produce this one myself. And it hurt his feelings, and I felt really bad about it. But, I was trying to save him from what I perceived was going to be a future heartbreak. But he wasn't having any of it at the time. So, and I knew that, okay, this is where my road ends with him, at this point. And it was fine. We parted amicably, and anytime anybody had asked me about Kevin, what's he doing? Well, how come you guys aren't working together? You guys are great now. I said, well, and neither of us ever said a disparaging word about the other person. I mean, we were both, real discreet with that. We made careful that we didn't, cast
Burn a
shade on
bridge.
each other.
Yeah,
because there was no reason. Because what we had, in the short time we were working together, it was pretty amazing. I mean, the stuff that we did together, and it was, to this day, I think he was the closest thing I ever had to a musical twin, as far as my sense of humor, as far as my just everything. We locked immediately, and we could finish each other's sentences. We had the same vinyl collection. We watched the same movies, all of that stuff. So,
yeah, that was evident in your Mark and Brian stuff, like Sweet Judy Blue Eyes and stuff. You could tell you guys were.
Yeah, it was a real lock, and we hosted the Mark and Brian show. One morning we hosted the whole damn thing. He and I,
legendary,
for 4 hours.
Yeah.
Wrote a song on the air, which was totally his idea. It was called "This One Goes to 11." And we just asked people to phone in lyrics or a guitar chord. We got all this shit together, and then we could take one more commercial break. We're going to write the song, and then we're going to come back and perform it. Within 5 minutes, we had to do this shit. This is live radio, man, And we did it. We pulled it off. For some reason, we were able to pull it off. Yeah, it was just one of those things, So we knew that we could depend on each other, to fill in the gaps or whatever it was. It was just one of those things. So that's why I think at the end, we both acknowledged that period in both of our lives where we really did have something. It was an amazing relationship, and we both grew from it. So we had respect for that, and that's why we never spoke ill of each other after that. And then of course,
in all fairness, I think it's safe to say that Kevin was a little bit negligent with his relationships and the way he dealt with people. But not to the point where he completely just burned a bridge, but where there was something that just kind of pushed you away or left you behind or whatever. It's always a common theme that I hear.
Well, it was, and I think a large part of that, if I'm going to risk being psychoanalyzed, to analyze it, was the difference between his father and his mother, because they were both at the funeral.
Yeah.
And the speech that his father gave afterwards was very, very telling. His father worked on the superconductor down in Texas, was an amazingly smart and brilliant individual, and was very, very cold and calculated, and often were using all of the Gilbert brothers in competition with each other. Like, look what your brother's doing, you're not doing. And so he vacillated between all of that, feeling like he never measured up, to his mother, who was an absolute gem. She was just the sweetest lady on the planet. And he would go back and forth to being the most generous cat that I've ever known, to being completely insecure and freaked out about stuff, because it was and it wasn't until the funeral and I saw them both, I went, aha, that's it.
Wow, I never thought of that. But there was that kind of like strange duality where you thought he was your best friend.
Very much.
And then, like for me, when we did The Lamb, and in retrospect, I shouldn't have even let this bother me, but it was just kind of a thing. Like, he then did a cover of Back in New York City and didn't even say a word to me until it came out. And I'm like, dude, we just worked our ass off doing The Lamb. I'm in your band, and you don't even tell me. I felt it was like sneaky and just kind of disrespectful. Like, if just say, like, be honorable and just say, like, look, I want to play keys on it. I'm doing it with Mike Keneally, and I hope you don't mind. Be courteous instead of just like, oh, here it is, and like, I felt, I don't know, disrespected. And so that's when I left around that time too. And also I kind of felt like he was going darker and darker and more.
Which he was.
Punk himself almost,
well, and that's why I remember when he shaved his head, and was like, why did you do that? And he goes, because my dad's coming to town. And I went, aha.
Wow.
So these little things that you see along the way start pointing out a roadmap, and you can see. So he had a lot of conflict with his upbringing, so he wrestled with that his entire life, that stuff, which is not. So.
Sean, if you want to know, so I had bowed out of Thud, and I had a girlfriend at the time, ironically, who was a lot like Sheryl, and I was, mid-20s. And he did, I bowed out, but like amicably and everything. And he was and I was playing in my girlfriend's band who was like, Sheryl. And he's like warning me. And he was right. He was totally right. He's like, dude, I know the time.
Hey, look, pal, I'm 20 years old. I've had a hell of a lot of experience with relationships.
Yeah, what do you know? I didn't know. Anyway, and I was living in Santa Monica. And then they did like a 3-piece without me. And they didn't even replace me because he didn't know many keyboard players. And I felt bad, actually. And then they did Caviar, which I didn't know about. And I had kind of done my own thing. And then I split up with that girl and just drove around aimlessly around the country. And then came back and met up with them. And we went to see Nick play with Tears for Fears. Nick DiVirgilio played with Tears for Fears. And I'll never forget this night. We both went to see him play and we talked. And it was like brotherly love. Everything was totally cool. And he's like, hey, why don't you come by the studio this weekend? And we'll listen, I'll play my new stuff or whatever. And I guess that would have been Caviar. And before the weekend even happened, I got the phone call from Mark McCrite that he had died. And I was in disbelief. I was like, I hope that this isn't true. It was a voice message. But at the very least, for me, I felt lucky that I had that moment with him. And I even, like, in that moment, just because it was a reunion thing, I got to kind of like have a closure thing with him where I said to him how much I love him and appreciate him and, miss him and all that good stuff. And I swear, like, he looked at me like it was the last time he was going to see me. It was so bizarre. He just looked at me like, kind of like, wow, like it was an epiphany. It was strange. And even that night, I think, like, that was a great, beautiful moment. And then after that moment, all hell broke loose. I think his car was stolen or something crazy. It just got, bad. But so that's the timeline, though. He had Thud, and then he made Caviar. He did Caviar with Brian McLeod and Paul Hill and Nick.
Paul Hill,
and it never got released with him. It got released, but not while he was alive. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah.
And I don't know if any of you have recurring dreams, but I do with him. I have dreams that he comes back and I'm like, where have you been? And he goes, I've been doing this. Come on, we have a project to do. I have those maybe once a year where he comes back and he comes back and I said, I knew you weren't dead.
Mm-hmm.
I knew you faked it, because if anybody could pull it off, you could do it.
Yeah.
I thought that too. I thought I saw him a few times.
I would have these,
with his
and
Pathfinder.
he would act like nothing ever happened. Like, yeah. So anyway, where were we? Yeah, let's go do this. I have those every year, once or twice a year.
Well,
I'll have a very vivid dream with him.
Wow. I
like
own his
coming back
mic.
and visiting.
I have the U47 that he used. Somehow I got it. And I did an album, my first solo album. I wrote a song and I reunited Thud. I got Nick DiVirgilio and Russ Parrish to play on it. And I dedicated the song to him and sort of did it in a Thud style of what I thought we would have done. Actually, it's sort of a fantasy for me to like think, had we gone into the studio, and we did a little bit, but like really made a whole album together with the vibe of those players and that sound, that kind of swirly Wurlitzer sound and all that kind of stuff. It'd be sort of like this. And I wrote the lyrics purposely, like pushing myself to try to be clever because he was such a brilliant lyricist. So I'm like, no, Dave, you need to use bigger words and be more references, anyway. And, but this, and then strangely enough, the song itself is about sort of like communing with, at least in terms of thinking about, you're going through some bullshit with a band or people or a relationship and how you would talk to your buddy about it. And like I said, it's sort of like that conversation where he was trying to say, dude, did you see what I just went through with Sheryl? You want to go through the same thing. And sure enough, but like, being burned and talking to other people who've been burned and, sort of comforting you with wisdom of like, yeah, I've been there. And, or, and that whole sort of talking about the music industry, talking about relationships, talking about music, and having this kind of almost, and then even in the song, I mean, again, this is like Easter egg stuff for people who really know, but the one little sort of thing that I tried to put in there was something he would do, which is breaking the fourth wall kind of a thing where I say, like, I'm talking to somebody from across whatever, and then I say, poetic license to pretend. Mm-hmm. So like for the song, maybe I'm just pretending, or maybe I'm really feeling it. But in reality, I kind of felt it. I did. I felt like, what would Kevin think of this song? Or, if he was around, like, what would the conversation be? I just kept, I don't know, I'd imagine him and he would come up in dreams and stuff.
I got a question. Do you think he ever met Jeff Buckley? I always saw kind of a parallel between both of them,
Yeah, I don't know that he ever did, but yeah, I can see some of the parallel stuff there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, Dave, I know what you mean. I don't know about you guys, but the other thing about Kevin was, he would say, "Hey, I want to play you something new I'm working on," and the feeling of that between when he would say that and when he would actually hit the play button, because anything could happen. He could play, he could play anything. And the stuff that he did was so amazing. And, between his production and his writing, and it was always like a good, complete thing. I've never worked with anybody where I had that sense of anticipation, where he would go, "Hey, I'm going to play something new." And you just go, "Oh my God, I have to hear this. Whatever it is, I have to hear it." Mm-hmm. He played me a lot of Shaming. And I moved to England for a while. I moved to LA and I hung out in LA. He and I would swap gear back and forth in the early days when he was just first dating Sheryl. We were still sort of on speaking terms. We weren't working together. We kind of got our relationship back into a good place. I'm profoundly thankful to Dave and to Kevin for the Lamb gig, because that gave me a chance to kind of heal that relationship, which was really good. But of all the people that I've worked with and all the situations I've been in, I've just never had that sense. I don't know if that's true for you guys either, but he could play something and it's like, he would always, like, things could be really surprising. Things that he could pull off and execute. And you would just go, how did you do that? And I'm a pretty technical engineer in the studio, and I've been engineering for a really long time. And I know, a lot about tape manipulation and a lot about recording. And Kevin and I grew up recording together and learned a lot of that stuff together. And still he would do things that I would go, wow, that was really interesting. What did you do there? How'd you do it, or whatever? And so just the sense of being able to hear new stuff from him. That's actually one of the things that pissed me off the most when he checked out, was losing that, not ever getting to hear, Water Under the Bridge or things like that. It's like,
well, it kind of leads to my question, which is one that Lyle asked about an hour ago, which is, what do you think
he's gone to bed by now? So,
yeah. What do you think he would have gone on to do, and what would he be doing today?
He'd be getting into trouble on Facebook.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. He'd be speaking his mind.
Yeah. He'd have his own label, that's for sure.
Yeah. Mark, did he like doing the TV music and film stuff? Do you think he would have ended up doing composition?
He never got a fair shot at doing anything and I'm sorry to say it, of real quality. You have to be in it for a number of years to work your way up to something of caliber. Yeah, you have to start with soap operas. You have to start with stuff that's on at 11 o'clock on Channel 5. Right.
Yeah, we all know about Lyle's crazy overnight success with that stuff, right? It took him 2 minutes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff that you have to save, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like Dark Justice, like P.S. I Love You, those things that he would use a surname. He wouldn't even use his own name. He'd use his porn name, Matthew Delgado. Yeah. Which was his middle name and the street he lived on, because he didn't want to be associated with that for discredit, But it was necessary to cut your teeth on that stuff. I think that given the opportunity, I think, he would have definitely risen to the occasion. But I think he got kind of tired of those mediocre projects and decided to the thing is, when you're writing for it doesn't matter if it's something that's negligible or something that's of merit, you still have to pass your writing by a committee of usually people that think just because they've been given a desk and an office and a secretary, that they've somehow mysteriously been imbued with musical insight, which is not the case. Yet you have people that are only too happy to render their opinion to justify their position that they were just put in. All the time with Steve Picaro and me on Justified, when we were writing for that show, God bless Graham, who was the showrunner, because he had a wall. It's like, no, you guys keep doing what you're doing, and I'll deal with the networks on that. So Graham Yost was a godsend, who's, by the way, is a huge Prog fan. Him and his brother. But so with Kevin, I think he would have gotten into that, but I think that the problem is that having to have somebody that was much more of a musical on a much lower rung telling you how your music should be didn't set well with him in the first place.
Yeah, it was his worst nightmare.
You need a thick skin for that stuff, and know how to take it into context, knowing that this isn't a slight to your abilities, it's actually a slight to their abilities, because they don't get what you're doing. So it's that kind of hard.
One of the things that I think that I'd like to think, I know that would have happened with him or even Jeff Buckley, is there just would have been an amazing catalog of music.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just with the more time.
Consistently.
And maybe, I'd say probably, given how young he was when he died, that there would have been an evolution back to more security and maturity and wisdom that would, allow more collaborations to be possible that weren't back then. There was a little bit of a strange kind of transfer of like a hypocritical transfer of the things he would complain about from others who like sort of left him behind. Like Sheryl kind of left the whole Tuesday Music Club behind, really all of them. He would do in a mini way himself. And it was a bit of just sort of like, a fine line between stupid and clever, a fine line between drive and mine. This is mine, like relax, you can share. And, but, I think over time, going through his 30s and just getting more albums under his belt and having, especially being part of the independent music revolution, because, you know, back then you really needed a record deal and all this stuff. And then there was no, you know, iTunes and the ability to just put out your album yourself.
Digital
so easily.
distribution.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, with some just, I don't know, self-reliance and, you know, independence, and that a lot of would have been possible. I mean, certainly for me, you know, I back then I was a sideman. I was a keyboard player and a backing vocalist. And now I'm a lead vocalist, and I put out my own solo records, and I have bands where I'm the vocalist. I mean, it's crazy. Like, I didn't really do that, but it's because I don't have to go to a fucking committee. I just do it. I'm like, I'm just, you know, I don't even care.
And it stands and falls on its own merit. And that's the thing.
He would have enjoyed that, because I think he, you know, going through the people that he talked to and the ambition and what he was trying to do, to be able to see eventually how, you know, for better or worse, the industry kind of collapsed, that whole thing as well. But what has emerged, besides, you know, the good and the bad that has emerged, there's the streaming and the lack of royalties and all that. But then there's the just independence, the ability to make your own record without going to a committee, go directly to your fans. I mean, wow. Like, sometimes I think, like, often I've thought, if he only knew that we'd be talking about him decades later, and that there'd be fans all over the world. Because, you know, back then there was no World Wide Web. You didn't reach the whole world. We were lucky to reach California. We only toured when we did Thud. I mean, like, played once in Texas, and then, you know, we didn't go past Texas.
Yeah. That continues to surprise me, that his music continues to live on. And obviously there's a quality factor there, but it still surprises me that there's still ongoing interest and people talk about it. And there's Facebook groups and stuff, and a bunch of nice people. But a lot of times it's like, well, you know, there was other, okay. I'm sorry. I won't say it. People are really vehement about that stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it
But
shows
he'd
you,
at least have like a
it,
Steven Wilson type career, you know, like a cult following, but a bigger cult following with a larger catalog. I think he would have a strong, independent. Yeah, he'd be making really good money doing the music he likes, I think, had he been around.
I think he would have been a producer also. I think he would have continued, because he loved production work. So I think he would have continued down that vein. I think he would have been even more chewed up and burned out by the industry, working with people he probably would have worked with. And it probably would have made him even more bitter and cynical. But I do think he would have been a producer, and I think he would have continued on as a solo artist. So.
Well, gentlemen, it's been an interesting evening, and I want to thank you all for taking the time.
it's your fault.
Yeah, I know. I have schemes and things, and this was just one of many. I'd love to have you all back, any and all of you.
What are you doing tomorrow?
In the future. We're going to talk about the 100 best prog albums.
Oh,
Let's start with the worst ones and work our way forward. No.
Wow.
No,
how do you do that without blood?
Yeah. Coming up this week, are you guys Jellyfish fans?
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Roger Joseph Manning Jr., Monday. I'm going to have an interview with him.
Awesome.
And he's putting his solo catalog out on vinyl and digital distribution for the first time. So we're going to look at those 3 albums and talk a bit about the Licorice Quartet. Have you heard the Licorice Quartet yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. It's great stuff. And Tuesday, I'm chatting with Steve Hackett. Speaking of Genesis.
Yeah.
Cool.
He's got a new autobiography called A Genesis in My Bed.
Ask him what the hell that means.
Well,
I'm scared.
Think of it this way. If you had a beetle in your bed, what would that mean?
Well, it'd be Paul or Rindo.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing. He
Does
basically,
Yoko count?
Would you be Barbara Bach? What was it?
you know, he was shagging some young lady, and she like made a phone call and said, "I've got a Genesis in my bed right now."
Oh God, really?
That's what it means. Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah. And then Saturday, you remember the School of Rock? The guy that founded it, Paul Green's my guest.
Oh,
Cool.
The original Jack Black,
Yeah.
the inspiration for that movie. Like long before all that, he's a Zappa fan, big Prog fan. So lots of cool stuff coming up. So thank you all so much. It's really been inspiring and enlightening to look back on one of my favorite artists, and one of y'all's as well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So,
John, thanks
stay
for having
strong.
us.
Yeah, stay strong, and if y'all can subscribe, it's YouTube.com/SOAL Night Live. I put all the shows up there for, an archive. So check it out. I think this was number 29. So there's a lot of good stuff in there to dig into. It's a lot of familiar faces. All right, you guys. Well, take care.
All right, you guys. Stay cool tomorrow. It's supposed to be 117 again. So.
All righty.
That's,
Man.
Break out the ice. All right, you guys. Take care.
thanks, Al.